Perhaps we need some outside universal threat to make us recognize this common bound. I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world.
Good evening and welcome to the Friday night edition of Spaced Out Radio tonight. My name is Dave Scott, and we're going to talk UFOs and everything in Eastern Canada from around Shag Harbour, Nova Scotia. Chris Stiles is going to join us. This guy's an expert on that great UFO event of 1967. Best part about tonight, we have each and every one of you in our chat room. Race fan in the gold medal position. David Norenberg with a silver. T-Bone, my man, taking home a bronze medal tonight. Kitty Caddywhack, how are you? Nice to see you. And thank you to our new membership, because we got members now. Yeah, we activated that on our YouTube channel. Mel WD40, Paramarv, AA Ron Baca, Deborah Rooney, Little Cam, Rock and Rory, Matthew Gutka, T-Bone, and Walter. You can join it too. We'd love it if you did. There's going to be some fun stuff coming up for you. Robert Lamoth, how are you? Forrest Louie is here. Forrest Louie will be signing autographs after the show. Line up to the left of the studio, if you don't mind, to the left of the studio. JSCO, Gory Tiger, nice to see you. Hi, Kenny, Stephanie Kinney Blankenship, and Trucker Andrew. Good to see you. Mama Catherine, mwah, I love you, my dear. I hope you're going to enjoy tonight's show, and it's a good way to head into the weekend. I hope you're doing well tonight. Much love to you. Road Flare and Bar Madison, how are you? Necessary Dialogue. Mel WD40 is here lubing us up for tonight's show, because you always want to go into a show nice and smooth. You don't want any of that rigidness, so thank you, Mel, for lubing us up tonight. Scrolling on down, we say hello next to Eternity Eternal. Cosmic Joe, thank you for joining us. As we continue on with our roll call here, there's Frankie B. Doug Shelby is here. The Doug Shelby has arrived, which means we can officially start this show. Jaquetta, how are you, my friend? As we continue on with roll call, Mr. Cowley. Dun, dun, dun. Welcome back to the show. Oh, Mr. Cowley. Dun, dun, dun. Loves his Spaced Out Radio. That's a good tribute to you, my friend. Good tribute. Destiny Rocks, how are you? Good morning, Skip to Malou. Pam Harris. And number 29 in your program, starting at left wing from Stockholm, Sweden, Lars Jansson. Flat 6, Little Cam, J Truth Seeker. Nice to see you all here. Louisville Charlie is here. Louisville Charlie will be signing autographs after the show as well. Line up to the right of the studio, if you don't mind. To the right of the studio. Rock and Rory, Nina Williams. Nice to see you. Hi, Marie K. And in the studio, good to have you both here. Just another guy named Harry. Nice to have you back. Missouri Man. Undead Jed, thank you for joining us. Hi there, Matthew Gutka and Marie Garman. How are you? Kitty Caddywhack, thank you for kicking off the Super Chat tonight. The Super Chat is a wonderful way to support what we do on this show on a nightly basis. So thank you very, very much for the love. Here we go. Scrolling on down. Michelle Eilis, how are you, beautiful? Good to see you. Lotus Spider, thanks for coming on in. Enrique, how are you tonight? I'm Hardcore over on X. The Watchman, how are you? as we continue on with our roll call. Eversor, good to see you. Marie, thank you for becoming a YouTube member. We greatly appreciate your love and support of SOR. And Michelle, thank you for that awesome super chat. Give the big guy a big hug for me if you don't mind. And I heard he's retiring from wrestling. What is with that? What is with the retirement from wrestling? Can't do that. Well, I know somebody who probably will have a word with that, probably. We'll see how that happens. New England Dirt Roadie, how are you? Good to see you. As we continue on with our roll call, let's get the radio side going. Hello and welcome to the radio and podcast side of Spaced Out Radio tonight. My name is Dave Scott. Chris Stiles is here. We're going to talk about Shag Harbour, other UFO action in Canada. We are in roll call on YouTube. Bobbert, nice to see you. As we continue on with our roll call, Candace Helfrich, nice to have you here. Brooke Michelle, thanks for coming on in. Operation Shutdown, good to see you. And we are done right there. I need a favor, everybody. Do me it right now. Throw those horns up. Let's rock.
Are you ready to hear your mystic voice of the night?
It's time to wake up.
He's here. Shush. Be quiet. He's ready for you to listen. Let's point our ears towards the little cabin in the woods. We're together, friends. Come. It's time for Spaced Out Radio with Dave Scott.
From the mountains of central British Columbia to you listening around the world, this, my friends, is Spaced Out Radio. I am your host, Dave Scott, sitting in the captain's chair of SOR headquarters. We welcome you to tonight's show on our terrestrial affiliates around North America, digitally on every major podcast network. Our website, spacedoutradio.com. We have a plethora of features for you. Rock out to Bumblefoot. Read the news wire. Check out our swag as well. You can follow us on X at Spaced Out Radio, Instagram at Spaced Out Radio Show, and on Patreon in the Space Travelers Club. Tonight's show is brought to you by Chive Charities. Help make the world 10% happier by visiting Chive Charities today. You can find them on our website. We're going to have an amazing show for you tonight, all the way from the beautiful province of Nova Scotia. Chris Stiles will be here to talk everything from Shag Harbour to UFOs. Then in hour number 3, Swamp Dweller will join us with another spooky story. Then extra small Lee Strauss will be in for the Q&A. So let's get right to it. I love this guest. It's only his second time ever on this show. Chris Stiles is an active UFO researcher who investigates select classic and current UFO incidents that have occurred in Atlantic Canada. He holds up to a blended view of UFO phenomena that allows room for both the ETH and a significant psychological component. He is best known for his work on the 1967 Shag Harbour Incident and has presented at several MUFON symposiums in Canada and the United States. Chris served as a paid technical advisor with several Canadian UFO feature documentaries, such as Ocean Entertainment's The Shag Harbour Incident and Northern Lights. He has appeared in several U.S. UFO specials, such as Canada's Roswell and UFOs II, Have We Been Visited? In 2019, Chris appeared in an episode of Ocean Mysteries with Celine and Fabien Cousteau. He is the co-author of 2 UFO books on the Shag Harbour Incident, Dark Object with Del Bantam, with Don Ledger, he's been on the show, and Impact to Contact by Arcadia House with Graham Sims. So let's get right to it. I think it's time. Chris Stiles, it is a pleasure and an honor to have someone of your stature in the UFO world back on Spaced Out Radio. How are you?
I'm like a teenager, Dave, and I'll tell you, it's I'm really can't wait to go here. I love the idea that this show is live. There's not enough of that anymore, and I hope they pick my brains.
Well, we're going to, my friend.
Yeah,
we're going to. Now, going back in time to little Chris, When did you become interested in UFOs?
I don't remember not being interested in UFOs, to be honest. It goes back, but certainly I became obsessed at the age of 12. And, it's a cliche, Dave, but like seeing is believing. And at the age of 12, although I was not in Shag Harbour, as mistakenly the too early printed covers say on the Dark Object book, which Whitley Strieber didn't want to have redone. At the age of 12, the same night as Shag Harbour, I was lucky enough to be up close and personal, closer than I wanted to be at that young age to a UFO, right here in Metro Halifax, Dartmouth. And, from that point on, what can you do? You just couldn't get enough. And, at a young age, I was an avid reader in that, and I got right into the heavy stuff. In those days, the best you could find would be books like The UFO Experience by Hynek and things like that. And I would just borrow anything and everything from the library. But let me back that up a bit again. Yes, I saw a UFO here in Metro, and that's often included in the documentaries. I looked out my window. It was about 10:20 at night, and where I lived in that time in downtown Dartmouth before some current tall buildings were built, you had a sort of near almost a cheesecake slice view of Halifax Harbor as it went out toward the ocean. And when I looked there, I could see that there was an orange sphere moving amongst the ships down there by the old Dartmouth Marine slip. I was supposed to be in bed, but I ran up the front door and my parents tried to block me, but I kept going because I was curious. And I ran to the waterfront. I went down through an alleyway by some industrial warehouses. And when I cut across the railway tracks and was literally at the water's edge, around the corner of some ships that were in for repair at the marine slips, came this 60-foot orange orb. And it was like the color of a poker when it first glows in a fire. You could almost barely see it, but it was there. It was about 10 feet above the water. And suddenly it dawned on me, hey, idiot, you're all alone, when you're 12 years old. And I was so frightened, Dave. I tried to run, and you really didn't have the courage. Every time it was like a false start. And I can remember my sneakers like sliding in the gravel and trying to get the courage to actually run. And when I finally did that and started running back up Maitland Street, I looked over my shoulder and this thing just passed through, not very far offshore between the view afforded between the rows of warehouses, and paid no attention to me whatsoever and moved on toward where the Coast Guard ships used to tie up. It turned out the next day that this made the news and many people seen it, but before long, my sighting and that many other people had seen it on the Halifax Dartmouth ferry or from the Angus L. MacDonald suspension bridge. It quickly became eclipsed by news coming out of Shag Harbour that something had come down out of the sky and crashed into the water, and that the RCMP were there and had witnessed this, and that there were a large group of witnesses, and that they were awaiting Navy divers to arrive. By Saturday, it happened on Wednesday near midnight, but by Saturday it was a headline story in the Halifax Chronicle Herald, which was one of Canada's most conservative broadsheets, and through that it became a line story that went out around the world. So my grandfather, who was in Shag Harbour, witnessed what happened there. I had my sighting here. You put it all together, what could you do? And no one's been able to put out that fire in me since. So I have not found the answers I always wanted between the covers of the books or watching the TV documentary. So I had to go and get my own answers. But you know what? I never found the time or motivation or that life gave me the space to do it until 1992. And what an adventure it's been since.
Chris, I don't know if you were alive when Shag Harbour happened, but you were very well known around the UFO community as being an expert on this. Take us back in time when you first heard about Shag Harbour. What was that like?
Well, I was very much alive. I was 12.
Oh,
And
my. Okay.
my grandfather was one of the many non-reporting eyewitnesses that was in the area at the time. He was down there on vacation from those very Dartmouth marine slips that I had run to. And the next day he called up and said, I want to talk to Chris, because they knew I was already an avid. He would have said not for science or anything scientific, right? And wanted to tell me that something they believe from space had crashed into the harbor, and the RCMP were around the shore doing patrols, and that people were watching and waiting for Navy divers to show up. Um, it's interesting because, when I think back about it, for me to have my maternal grandfather call back, when you're a young boy, like many, I had this great bond with my grandfather, particularly being an only child. And, my father was in the Navy and often away at sea. And, you know, when for him to call and do that, it was like, yes, validation. And then I could say I wasn't deserving all that hollering and punishment when I came back in the house from running down to the waterfront to see a UFO. And I came in and I told them quite unabashedly that, where are you going? What the hell were you doing? And I went down. I think I seen a UFO. Well, when grandfather called the next day from Shag Harbour to say that he had seen a UFO, and so had many in the fishing village, well, you know. But do you want to know what actually happened there? What people seen that night? What it was like? Get a sense, or
Please.
you want to? Yeah. Well, it's October the 4th, 67, the so-called Summer of Love. It was good weather down there. The sky was clear, uncharacteristic, although October we tend to get them. It was so clear that the stars, it was said, weren't shimmering, and you could see the faintest of them without binoculars, sixth of magnitude. And what happened is people who were out that night driving in vehicles, or people that were just letting the dog out for a walk in their home, looked up, and what they seen was that a set of lights came in. It first flew in from an easterly direction, hovered over what locals call the sound of Shag Harbour, and it stayed there for several minutes, tilted to a 45-degree angle, and it was a set of flashing lights in an unusual pattern, not like commercial traffic. It went 1, 2, 3, 4, and then they'd all flash at once, and this would repeat over and over. Like I say, this series of lights tilted to about a 45-degree angle, then suddenly descended rapidly to the water surface. Most people who were out in their vehicles lost sight of it at that point behind the intervening tree line and that. But as I discovered years later, there were people who actually saw it enter the water and were there. And I can tell you that little story too, and that was very cool. Anyway,
We got time, man. You got the conch here.
Oh, cool. Yeah, several people called the RCMP detachment right away. The first one is, in fact, chair of the group down there, the Shag Harbour Incident Society, that runs the annual symposium we have in the nearby town of Yarmouth, right, which will be happening this October on the anniversary once again, third, fourth, and fifth weekend. He was the first person to call the RCMP that night. Now, young Laurie Wickens, a fisherman, already had a reputation as kind of a rough and tumble guy in the community. And when he called the RCMP, Corporal Victor Werbicki answered the phone. And when he spoke with Wickens, first thing he asked him after he said, "You guys need to get the Mounties here. We think a plane has crashed into the water," which brings us to one of the key features of the case of Shag Harbour, which is the fact that no one reported a UFO. And he said, "You guys better get here." Well, the first thing the Mountie asked him, even just reporting an aircraft, was, "Laurie, what you been drinking? Anything?" "No," he says, "nothing." He says, "There's 3 friends here with me in the car. You guys better get here. There's something came down. We seen lights and we lost sight of it for a while, but it's on the surface of the water right now." So he said, "Yeah, we'll check it out." And when he hung up, his friends in the car said, "Laurie, are the Mounties coming?" He says, "I'm not sure they believe me." He was about to pull away. The RCMP called the payphone back. Now, in those days, there was no street lights there. The moon had already set earlier in the evening. Okay, so it's very dark. But they call back and they say, "Wickens, if you're there, stay there." were on the way. Now, it turns out that one of the RCMP officers that responded, there would be three eventually: Corporal Victor Verbicki, Constable Ron Pond, and Constable Ron O'Brien. Ron Pond was out on highway patrol, and he saw the lights pass over in the air and go down out of sight. He was on Cape Sable Island, which has a causeway over to it at the time. And the RCMP comment at that point, a crowd is gathering by what locals call the moss plant, which used to process Irish moss and other fish products there in the area. When the RCMP get there, the light no longer appears like a sequence of four flashing lights, but now it's a pale dome of yellow light floating on the water. And according to Ron Pond, who looked at it through his field glasses, he took it out of the trunk of his cruiser. He says that it was moving under its own power toward open sea. And when I interviewed him, that's what he told me. And he said this on camera when we filmed episodes for Sightings in the 90s. They flew him down from the Yukon to whatever, and he has stood by that observation. One of the neat things he did was when he looked, he noticed that the light passed in front of a local feature that's still there to this day called the Budget Buoy. It stands 8 feet out of the water, and when the pale dome of light passed it, floating on the surface of the water, it completely eclipsed the buoy. So you had at least 8 feet of relief out of the water, which is kind of neat. He made that kind of observation. So the RCMP commandeered 2 local fishing boats, and they started making their way toward it. But the light disappeared. Some say it just simply went out. Others say it submerged before they could reach it. When they got out to where the last known surface position was on the water of the Sound, dense yellow foam was there in a track that the UFO had been moving. And it was half a mile or so in length and about 80 feet in width. And some say it smelled of sulfur. Some say it didn't have a smell. It was yellow, frothy, and still bubbling to the surface. One of the 2 boats who responded, that was owned by Lawrence Smith, when I interviewed him at length about this many times, he said they weren't even fussy about putting their boats in it because they had concerns for buoyancy. Anyway, eventually this foam dispersed in the ebbing tide. The Coast Guard was called. They responded from 12 miles away. If you can picture this, it's so quiet down there that when they started the twin diesel engines 12 miles away, you could hear that in Shag Harbour. And they opened them up, and they were getting there as quick as they could. Because remember, this was still being reported and seen as a potential aircraft crash. And it was only as time went by and there were no missing or late aircraft that they looked at the other things. But when the Mounties went around and re-interviewed witnesses in the next few days, it was determined that there were no missing or late aircraft. And when they put all the aggregate of details together, including what Constable Ron Pond had seen himself, the conclusion was that it was some kind of unidentified flying object. A report was sent to RCMP headquarters. From there, the defense headquarters in Ottawa, and there they handed it to what was known as the Air Desk, Canada's equivalent of Blue Book. And they ordered an immediate underwater search by Maritime Command, which went on for 5 days. They searched, found absolutely nothing, and claimed no results. Now, there is controversy in that finding too, because some of the locals claimed they saw them bring up a small bit of debris and put it in the boats. And when they would quiz the divers said, "Oh, these are just markers we placed on the bottom," but it was twisted up metal. So inevitably, you had the rumors in the community too. But it was one of those things. Eventually, after that 5 days of searching, they put out a press release from DND headquarters and said there were no results of the search. We don't know what it was. Guess it was one of those things. It could have been anything from a strange line. I think they said in the newspaper interview, could have been anything from a grasshopper to another planet. We didn't find anything, but it's not an aircraft, right? However, behind the scenes, that was deceptive. That may have been the end to the underwater search. It wasn't the end of Ottawa's interest in it or what they did. Because I discovered that when you looked ahead in the papers, that 1 month later, they, in every newspaper in Nova Scotia, they put an ad on the front page, and some of them it wasn't on the front, most of them it was on the front page saying military wants UFOs reported, and told you who to report to and how to get it. And that person was Major Victor Eldridge, who was the XO at the nearby Back Row NORAD base. So, and they were still knocking on doors and gathering it. So, they may have canceled that immediate underwater search with the 7 divers from the Fleet Diving Unit, but they were still trying to gather information. One of the things that puzzled me early on, Dave, on this, and here's where I get that other little story I want to put in, is that when I looked at all the military telexes, and there was a lot of them in Records Group 77 at what used to be called National Archives, now Library and Archives Canada. And when you looked at that, it always described the lights as being about 15 feet apart, and 4 of them, and how they flashed and that. But nobody said anything about could see a connecting object or what was behind the lights. However, I found in Ottawa, when I put in a request to the Directorate of History at Defense Headquarters, that they had a memo that circulated from the Defense Minister to the Air Desk and everybody else who should be notified. And in that, it said in the third paragraph of this memo, it says, a preliminary investigation of this incident has been conducted by the Rescue Coordination Center in Halifax, and that it was found that this, whatever was responsible for this object, was not a flare, float, aircraft, or in fact any known object, and was seen to be at least 60 feet in diameter. And that word always threw me, diameter, because everybody I'd ever interviewed, the fishermen, the initial 7 people that called the Mounties, simply saw these lights. And it was only really about 4 years ago that I found why they said in diameter and who made that observation. It was the lightkeeper's wife that had been on Portage Island off the shore. And when the UFO hit the water, it was actually going toward the island, toward open sea. She was in the living room knitting. Her husband had gone to bed, and she saw these lights coming in, and she thought too at first that it was an airplane crashing. But at the moment that the UFO hits the water, the lights were being reflected back on it, and as the water rushed over it, she could clearly see that it was metallic and round like a classic disc. And right away she called her husband, who called after she finally pried him out of bed and got him out and said she just seen something crashed into the water. He called the Coast Guard and the Mounties, and the whole thing started to unfold. But she was that source. She was one of the few. I know a few other people who had indeed actually seen it enter the water, but we could never quite track them down. And some of them were just unwilling to talk about it, and were quite freaked out by the incident, didn't want the public attention. But it was the lightkeeper's wife who got it to the lightkeeper, who got it to his bosses at the Coast Guard and on up the chain of command. But she was adamant, and all these years later, and she also claims, and here's something that's often missed, although it is in one of the documentaries, which is, I believe UFOs II have we been visited. No, I think it's in Canada's Roswell, which was the U.S. History Channel production. And at the end of that, it has footage where they are talking to, he's since passed on there, the lightkeeper, Irvin Banks. But he found artifacts the next day and collected them and packed them off.
Let's hold it right there, because we are going to go to break here at the bottom of the hour. We are talking with Chris Stiles here. He has books out about what I consider Canada's greatest UFO incident, Canada's Roswell, Shag Harbour. Coming up next on Spaced Out Radio. I could literally listen to you for hours. No BS, man. I could listen to you for hours. I'm just so enthralled right now.
I was a busy guy in the 90s, Dave. I'm going to tell you, going through this, I left no stone unturned. If there was somewhere to go, someone to see, I interviewed the guys at the air desk in Ottawa. I went up there and met them. They were all retired at that point, right? Admirals, lightkeepers, fishermen, RCMP officers. I tracked them all down. There's nothing like pressing the flesh and getting it that way, right? I use whatever I have to use, telephone, email, whatever, but nothing comes up to the personal interview when you can wring out those details and get the emotional reaction. I remember years later when I first found the near collision that Pan Am Flight 160 had over Shag Harbour the night before, that when I first spoke to the co-pilot and the flight engineer, years later, my first interview, he was on a cell phone in the Rockies, and we had a poor connection. I could still hear the emotion in his voice when he described how, the tension in the cockpit that night, on the cargo flight that they were flying out of JFK, as they crossed the Gulf of Maine. It's those things. That's the real payoff in this. When you get those interviews and you hear that and these guys are looking you in the eye, it just makes the hair stand on your neck. And that's what's always driven me on is, and I tell everybody, you want to be a good researcher, get out of the armchair.
Right. Well, we don't have enough of that going on in this field. That's for sure.
No. And, people, you have to look at all the evidence too, right?
Yes.
Can't stress it enough.
Oh, I agree with you. We got about 3 minutes here before we have to get ready for the show again. Medium Omar MJ, who blamed me for becoming a Toronto Maple Leafs fan. I would never wish that upon anybody, just for clarification.
67, they won the Stanley Cup that year after Shag Harbour.
Yeah.
I think that was the last time, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
Yes, sir.
I have so many Leaf fan friends that there's nothing greater that I have when the Leafs are eliminated from the playoffs. There is no greater feeling than me going on social media and just typing 67. It is perfect for me. Quickly here, Christopher Sean, how are you? Miss Tessa Marie, good evening to you. Dan Peters, nice to see you. And let's see here. Jerence Carter, how are you? I like this. You know what, Omar? I will say this, my friend. If we ever are able to have a conversation, please try to explain cricket to me, because I absolutely love watching cricket, and I have zero understanding of what is really going on. So I would love to learn from you, my friend. Ginger Turtle shakes a fist in Leafs fan frustration. 67, my friend. 67. Oh, that just feels so good to say. That's all right. Oh. But you being in Halifax, then, you must be a Leafs fan. Or, no, you'd be a Habs fan.
Oh, yeah, we're mostly Habs fans. There's a lot of Boston fans here, though, too. You'd be surprised.
Really?
Yeah, well, there's always been kind of a connection with New England here for a lot of reasons, just because it's coast and the way businesses work down there. But the other thing is that, during the Halifax explosion, they were the first ones to really help us. Trains came up from Boston.
Right.
And there's always been that connection.
Right. Well, I guess with Nathan McKinnon and Sidney Crosby, there's a lot of Pittsburgh and Colorado fans.
2 miles that way is where they grew, where they used to skate.
Yeah.
Grow up, sure. Yeah.
For sure. Give me a couple seconds here. Just want to say a big thank you to Kitty Caddywhack and Michelle for our lone super chats. Greatly appreciate your love. Thank you, Marie and Flat Six, becoming new members of our YouTube channel. We appreciate that. I got to write down a list. I knew I would forget this. I got to write down the list. I promise I will, so I can put it on a scroll for everybody. But join our new membership. It'll get you private videos, private conversations with SOR people. And here we go with the next half hour. Second half hour of Spaced Out Radio is now underway. Good to have you with us. My name is Dave Scott. We appreciate you tuning us on in wherever you are on this beautiful planet we call Earth. Chris Stiles coming up here talking about Shag Harbour momentarily. But first, we want to remind all of you that if you missed portions of this show or others, check out our free archives on YouTube or any major podcast network. Our website, spacedoutradio.com. We have a plethora of features for you. Rock out to Bumblefoot, read the news wire, check out our swag as well. Follow us on X at Spaced Out Radio, Instagram at Spaced Out Radio Show, and on Patreon in the Space Travelers Club. The Desert Clam has set the password. Well, I'll get to the password next half hour. We will. What am I doing? I'm early and excited for it. Chris Stiles is here. He is an expert on the Shag Harbour UFO incident of 1967. And Chris, a lot happened in Canada in 1967. Mm-hmm. And we not only had Shag Harbour, the Stefan Mikulik case at Falcon Lake happened. It's the last time the Toronto Maple Leafs won the Stanley Cup, and the Canadian Armed Forces all became one instead of separation between Air Force, Army, and Navy. A lot was happening politically back then. How does UFOs fit into 1967?
Well, it was a busy year for them for sure. I mean, one of the other classic cases, of course, was the Stefan Mikulik case there at Falcon Lake. You know, the landing case there that, you know, and in fact, when you look back at some of the policy documents of the day going on in Ottawa, Defense Headquarters, cases like Shag Harbour and Falcon Lake are the two that are most often listed as reasons why, unfortunately, by 1968, UFO responsibilities for investigations was taken from the Royal Canadian Air Force and given to the National Research Council. And the reason I say it's unfortunate, because to be honest, in those years of the air desk, they did a very serious job of investigating UFOs. Cases like Falcon Lake and Shag Harbour had actual investigations carried out with field units, you know, in the military, whatever they needed. To put it in perspective, in 1967, the air desk at D&D HQ received 256 reports from police or RCMP sources, right? Out of that, when they went through it, they picked 7 cases that were worthy, as they were happening, of like on-site investigations. Shag Harbour was one, Falcon Lake. There were others like Camrose, Alberta, the landing case at the Suffield Experimental Air Station, things like that. But, you know, they would send men and order underwater searches they did in Shag Harbour. And I know that when they weren't doing that, they were lobbying to have UFOs taken more seriously. When I interviewed Squadron Leader William Bain in 1994 in Ottawa at my hotel there, I was staying right downtown at the Travel Lodge there, one street over from Wellington. And he told me that one of the things they tried to get through was that they'd like to see in Nova Scotia 3 Sea King helicopters that were spread out across the province. And if they weren't needed for an emergency search and rescue case, that they were on just standby to check out some of these UFO cases that were happening off the coast so frequently, you know, particularly in the Shelburne area. But right down to Sydney too, at the other end of the province, But they were told they just didn't have the money to tie up the hardware for that. But these guys were very serious. And I know that when the transfer came through and their investigative capacity was handed off to NRC, what we know is that even in the records there, you can see when the order comes through, there's a copy of it that's right in Records Group 77, and it's the writing of Bain. I've learned how to recognize the writing of the different investigators there. And in the column, he writes, the colonel, he says, I think when I'm done, I'll write a book and call it The Power of Negative Thinking. They didn't want to give up the UFO search, right? And, they did an amazing job compared with Blue Book, which at that point was basically a filing system, And unfortunately, that's the way it goes. The NRC picked two good men to investigate UFOs at first, Professor Tennyson at the University of Toronto and Rupert McNeill, a geologist at Acadian University. But they never did call upon field units or thought they had the right to. And once they retired, nobody replaced them that was really investigating, and it just became a filing system, and all that had fallen apart and gone away by 1995, And this is what happened. And to this day now, nobody really holds the mantle of officially being a division that's looking in for the public here and interfacing with it on UFO cases, as they come out of police reports or direct public input. I guess that Sky Canada project there was considering that, but that's already been thought about for 3 years. Hopefully something comes out of it. But this has been the history. The unfortunate thing in Rupert McNeill, I found a few of his things in Records Group 77 and 24 in Ottawa at Library and Archives Canada. But I've actually been contacted by many people in the geophysical science community wanting to know what I found, because everybody was looking for his work, not just in UFOs, but his regular science work. And unfortunately, what I discovered, I really dug into that when I went to Acadia and spoke to the archivist and did some follow-up. I found that, unfortunately, a jealous U.S. colleague had destroyed all his paperwork, including all the UFO work. And there was actually a court case about it, and it never got a lot of publicity. And I spoke to the son of the judge that heard the case. And, so much of our heritage has gone that way. It's unfortunate, because the few things I did find from McNeill's work here in Nova Scotia showed that, like the air desk, he took it very seriously. He may not have called on field units, but he certainly met key eyewitnesses, traveled, interviewed them face to face, and did what he could. A lot of good meaning people, but without the government behind it and the policy, and without them being replaced, it all goes away in the end.
When we look at, the Shag Harbour incident, one thing that I noticed about that, and I still think it's controversial, at least in my mind, was our former Minister of Defense, Paul Hellyer. He was in power. He's the one who forged the Canadian Armed Forces together. Yes. Do you think that he actually knew what was going on? Because I remember him telling me that he had zero clue into what really happened.
That's right. Because a little history lesson here, Dave. At the time, that was one of the few periods in history when Shag Harbour happened and Falcon Lake, when Canada had two defense ministers at the same time, right?
Yes.
And the other one would have been Leo Cadieux. And when you look at any of the UFO documents about this transfer to NRC, or who was receiving these reports, when I talk about the memo that said the Shag Harbour is definitely nothing conventional, the sign off on it, and the person who always got copy was Leo Cadieux. He was the one actively involved. At the time, the unification, I think, completely wrapped up Paul Hellyer, right? And as he often admitted himself, he became very interested in the topic years later. after his political career when he read the book The Day After Roswell, right? And that was really where his interest began. But while he was serving as defense minister, unification was his baby, and I guess it was all consuming. And, I think he was a political fall guy that the liberals used for that. He tried to start his own political party afterwards, and he initially tried to join the NDP, and they wouldn't have him. And it's really, I think he was used. But at the time, he was not interested in UFOs. That came much later, and the man certainly had a passion for it then. But at the time, these matters and decisions about transfer or cases or whether money should be spent on specific cases was handled by the defense minister, Leo Cadieux. And usually, unless it was really as big as those cases, it would have been handled by those next to him. Like they used to have a scientific advisor to the vice chief of defense staff, which at the time was Schaefer, and he would have handled such decisions, Whenever I could, I've always interviewed these people or gotten as close as I could to how it worked or their colleagues if they had already passed on. And it's interesting, It's a complicated history. And usually when you hear these names, you don't hear the name, for example, of Leo Cadieux, but he was the guy handling UFO matters at a time when we officially were handling UFO matters and officially investigating them to our Air Force at a far greater level and much more seriously than the United States Air Force was.
It was a time of Canada's unification of 100 years of being a country. It was also a time when the military, like we said, was going through a lot during that time with unification as well of the three services. And it also was a time when the beloved and legendary Avro Aero project was canceled, which really seemed to kill momentum of airplane building in Canada as well. Do you think any of this had ties to do with our reaction to Falcon Lake and Shag Harbour and other events?
Well, the cancellation of the Aero, I think, was back in '59, right? With the Diefenbaker government, John Diefenbaker. I'll tell you where things connect. Like there's gaps in the way history here is often portrayed.
Yes, 59. I apologize. You're right. Correct. Sorry about that.
59. So that would have happened long before. So there's no connection there, right? I had to get into the history a lot more on the Shelburne case, which really I discovered through Shag Harbour, 29 years later, trying to make sense of that and why people were trying to connect that when I eventually found the correct date and, what was involved in that case. But what I found then was that, my God, there was a lot of drama going on. I mean, when you look at the Shelburne case, here's a case where the guy who was on that mission, who designed that mission, that, mind you, serendipitously ran into two alien craft on the bottom while they were doing a minesweeping mission, was the guy who 2 years later in '62 was the guy who disobeyed the prime minister and the defense minister and took American orders directly during the Cuban Missile Crisis and emptied Halifax Harbor and sent all the ships here out. And this is back in the day when Canada had a 60-ship Navy, unlike now, to aid the Americans in the blockade of Cuba, right? And John Diefenbaker had told Ken Dyer, who was the admiral in charge of the Atlantic Fleet, we are not going there. Kennedy was right in the office with them in Ottawa. When I looked at the notes of all that, and I couldn't even find books that covered it well, but I read like PhD students, like their thesis and dissertations on this and the interviews they'd done. And it was just fascinating. And, here it was 2 years later where we have this most secret UFO case. Shag Harbour was very open. The Shelburne case is nothing like that. And you see how these people acted. Can you imagine the scandal in the U.S. if an admiral had disobeyed the president? And yet, because of this, because of him, Diefenbaker not wanting to carry out Kennedy's wishes, it ended his career, the fallout from that, how we weren't going to support them at first. But when Ken Dyer left the opposite day, and the last thing he heard going out the door was Diefenbaker saying, "We are not doing that. We're not going to help the Americans. I don't want any press statements saying, how you feel about this and whatever." Doug Harkness was the defense minister, told them, "I guess I can count on you to do the right thing." And he went right down and contacted Norfolk and asked for orders. Because at the time he felt his duty to NATO, he was a NATO commanding officer too, that superseded him being a Canadian admiral. And there's been many books written about that since. But he felt like this could have been World War III, this could have been it. Halifax was in a situation it was launch it or lose it, and it was a time we had to show strength. And, there's been some treatment of it, but when you look at this guy and figure that in the Shelburne case, this is the guy who was flown out there in the end after, according to the divers, they realized there were over a couple of USOs. This guy here would have just acted on his own with whatever was need be. And when we look at the ship's log, what did I find? That October the 12th, 1960, they declared DEFCON 1. Supposedly, this has never happened. If you even go to Wikipedia and you read about the DEFCON system, it'll say the highest we ever were was DEFCON 2 during the Cuban Missile Crisis. But when I looked at the logbook, which I got from Ottawa for HMCS Cape Scott, which was the command ship of a mission with 20 NATO ships, 10 American, 8 Canadian, plus a diving platform in Shelburne Harbor. What I found was that on October the 12th at 12:40 in the morning, they declared DEFCON 1. And supposedly that had never happened, not even by a commander in the field. It's in the log. It's not an internet rumor. This was released to me with a cover letter from Library and Archives Canada. And if you couldn't read all the little faded copy and the military jargon and the naval lore to understand what you were looking at, it would have been easily missed. I don't think they realized what they released to me that day. And of course, some of the best breakthroughs on Shag Harbour happened the same way. Release of the Space Object Contingency Plan, which I got, the Mounties' policies on UFOs and how they interacted with the Americans when they would come up here on cases. All that got revealed. I've been very lucky on that. Persistence pays off, Dave. You got to get out of the armchair. And when you see a break and somebody slips up, boy, you got to go for the throat. And that's what I've been doing. And, sometimes you don't find what you want. Sometimes you find something better.
We got 6 minutes to go before we have to go to break at the top of the hour. Chris Stiles is our guest tonight on Spaced Out Radio. You can find his books on Shag Harbour on Amazon. Getting back to the Shag Harbour incident. Now, this one also involved both the American and Canadian Navy, I believe.
Yeah. There weren't a lot of like U.S. ships coming up, but certainly I've heard described to me by ELINT officers that flew in the RCAF that it was one of the few times they were able to enter American airspace. They were given sort of carte blanche clearance, and aircraft from both nations were weaving a pattern and dropping sonar buoys and doing a search like in the time afterwards, right? And everything was handled unusually, right? But there wasn't a large amount of ships. I mean, I recently seen there's an awful lot of mistakes that get passed on, and they tend to get passed on again. There was some documentary treatment on a show I wasn't any part of, and I saw Richard Dolan say that, and then the HMCS Granby sailed down to Shag Harbour. It did not. 7 of the divers that had HMCS Granby on their on their caps would have been flown down by helicopter, to the Shelburne base and then driven to the area, and they used the local Coast Guard boat until they hired a local platform, right? The Granby never sailed, right? Little details like that get garbled, and they tend to get passed on. You know, I certainly made mistakes in the beginning, and but there's one we didn't make. I don't know where that arose from, but yeah, if you were in the fleet diving unit in those days, you see the Navy, even before unification, was going through a restructuring. And, you know, when they wanted those divers, they'd simply call the fleet diving unit and say, we need 7 divers. You know, 4 went down initially and 3 followed the next day. And they drove through the daylight hours, you know. But the thing is, you know, there was a protocol. And in the early 60s, like in the Shelburne case, divers were assigned to ships. Every destroyer escort, the Cape Scott, which I mentioned, which was a floating NATO command center, by the way, a large ship. When you look at that ship, it would have had 3 divers stationed on it. That was their posting. That was their specialty. But by the later 60s and 67, the structure was different. Divers were not assigned to ships. You know, they would be called upon as needed, but from the fleet diving unit and temporarily assigned or flown out there in a Sea King. And remember, by this point, a lot of the destroyer escorts had been converted, and you could land like Sea Kings on the deck of them and that, right? So, you know, you got to look into the history of that too, and you can therefore quickly spot the mistakes, right? But yeah, you know, it was a time of changes. And, you know, I can't stress how different 1960 was from 67. In 1960, I'll put it this way, people still trusted their government. Think about it. You know, like those Kennedy years, you see the old clips, right? By 67, even though you're still in the 60s, that was gone. Gone. You know?
Yeah, that's hard to believe. It seems so far away and off pace from what we see in today's society.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you know, it's like you see those old clips of Kennedy, right? Ask not what your country can do for you, right? But that was the attitude in 1960, 59, 61, 62. The world was a different place in 67. You know, the counterculture, the Beatles, Summer of Love, you know, people questioned everything, you know. In 1960, they trusted their government, right? So it was very easy to hide a case like like Shelburne then. In 67, you couldn't hide Shag Harbour. You know, it was open. You couldn't just close the roads and say, go away, no show here, boys and girls. You know what I mean? That wouldn't wash, right? Canada in 67 was not Roswell in 47. It wasn't even Shelburne in 60, you know? So you have to see these things in perspective. So, you know, you go back, you do your best investigation, you always get personal, you talk to the people, you press the flesh, but you got to study history too, or you're doomed to, you know, again, another cliche, but so true, to repeat those mistakes or to miss the point, or, you know, and such little detail sometimes can come back and make it all fall in place. I mean, I searched for 29 years for Shelburne, and it was one sentence in an updated Wikipedia article that sent me in the right direction. One sentence.
We have about 40 seconds to go here. Why is Shelburne kind of so hidden compared to Shag Harbour? Short answer, and we can carry it on after.
The short answer is this, is that it all happened underwater 10 miles from downtown Shelburne out by a point of land. There were no civilian witnesses, okay? And it was at a time when military and people accepted what the government said, and there was no need to say anything at all, was there? You know,
I guess that would...
They clamped that one down tight, Dave. You couldn't have done it.
And I can see that. I can see where they've clamped that one down. I mean, who clamped it down, though? Was it the government, the military, the RCMP?
It was the Navy of both nations, right? I mean, like I say, this was a joint minesweeping training mission, 20 NATO
Right.
ships, 10 US, 8 Canadian, and some dive platforms.
All right. Chris Stiles, we have him for another hour on Spaced Out Radio. I got so many questions left for this gentleman. We'll be right back for hour 2. This is Spaced Out Radio with host Dave Scott. All right, my friend, I'm going to put you back in the green room. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be back in about 5.5 minutes. Okay.
Okay, great. See you then, Dave.
All right. Chris Stiles, everybody. We'll bring him right back here momentarily. All right, we got about a minute to go here.
Mhm.
Bring Chris back on. See if we missed anybody here. Coming on in late. And big thank you tonight to Kitty Cannywack and Michelle for our super chats and our new subscribers in Marie, Flat 6, Emperor Penguin, and Amy. Thank you very much for joining our SOR membership here on YouTube. It will provide you with episodes, just not show episodes, but free talks, just us privately, and maybe a little bit more coming up. We haven't decided yet. Don't forget to shop at our Spaced Out Radio store. We do not have ugly swag, people. No ugly swag. I just recently added a bunch of new Bigfoot t-shirts, if that's your chi and zen. And here we go with the next half hour, or next half hour. All right, here comes hour number 2 of Spaced Out Radio tonight. My name is Dave Scott. Thank you very much for tuning us in, wherever you are on this beautiful planet we call Earth. Hey, we want to say hello to everyone tuning us in on our terrestrial affiliates around North America, digitally on every major podcast network. Our website, spacedoutradio.com. We have a plethora of features for you. Rock out to Bumblefoot, read the news wire, check out our swag as well. You can follow us on X at Spaced Out Radio, Instagram at Spaced Out Radio Show, and on Patreon in the Space Travelers Club. The Desert Clam has set the password for tonight in the SOR Space Travelers Club. Venisect. Venisect is your password. Use it wisely, Space Travelers, as the Clam sets the password each and every night right here on Spaced Out Radio. Here is Chris Stiles. He is one of Canada's top UFO researchers, and we are talking about the Shelburne Incident. Why is it so hidden compared to Shag Harbour? And it is a good one. It happened right in the ocean, and many things are very much legend and lore from this case. You can find Chris's books by going to Amazon. Chris, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, it's a pleasure, Dave. It's it's always a blast, man, to be up till 3 a.m. talking about my favorite thing. That's the
Well,
thing.
we are so glad. We are so glad you're here.
Listen, before we went to break there, you asked me for a short answer, and I gave you one. I got another really short one about, how they could keep that so secret. This whole thing happened only 1 or 2 nautical miles from Canadian Forces Station Shelburne. And here's the thing, in 1960, it was a U.S. base on Canadian soil. No Canadian worked there.
Weird.
Yes, that had changed by 67, because in 1962, it went under an arrangement like NORAD has, where it's 50-50. And, the commanding officers even would rotate every year, to the other nation, right? But in 1960, it was a U.S. base on Canadian soil, and it only flew Old Glory there, right? And you got to remember, it was Canada's most secret base as a U.S. base, but even when it went two-way, because it was the coordination center for submarine detection in the world's oceans. 64 substations, sonar stations, essentially, where it came ashore, and the hub for that was Shelburne, Nova Scotia. It became operational in 1955, the year I was born, and it went offline in 1995, pardon me. It was operational for 40 years there. And when that changed and it became, we had our own at Maryland Center here in Halifax, that took over for it, and the data was sent to us, and the Americans had their own connection to it. When it became Canadian, things were very open in Halifax. You could go in and get tours. You could see the big stuff where they plotted on the screen, but you no longer can, because that all changed after the Jeffrey Delisle scandal here, where it was found he was selling data to the Russians. Right.
Right.
So Nowadays, it's not quite as open as it was, but I can remember going in there and you could see the tracings and you could say, what's that up there? And one of the plotters would look at it and say, oh, that's a pod of right whales 100 miles offshore, you know? So, but those days are gone. But yeah, it was really tight back then. So yeah, you know what I mean? No civilians saw this happen. It happened underwater, 10 miles from downtown Shelburne. You had the U.S. base there. They even closed the road for a while to the base. They were controlling the area and the nearby vantage points. So, you know, it was a different time and people didn't question it. You know, that they had good reasons. The government was looking out for you and I then, they thought, and all was good with the world. 1960, Leave It to Beaver, etc. You get the drift.
For people who may not be familiar with Shelburne, explain what happened and when.
Okay, in what happened back then was, first of all, Canada had a large navy then. There was a time after World War II where we had the third largest navy for a number of years, right? The U.S. would have been the biggest, and then Britain, and then us. And during that time, we were much more involved in working with the Americans on joint NATO missions and with our European allies than we are nowadays. We just don't have the hardware or the manpower. We all know how the Canadian military has shrunk over, you know, the decades, right? But at the time, these things were frequent. And one of the things we did is we did a lot of minesweeping training missions, right? And there was a series of them. And in 1960, we were about to have the fifth one of a series that had gone on in training. And these missions were usually pretty demanding. In this case, it involved, like I say, 10 U.S. ships and 8 Canadian, plus a large diving platform that was a 75-foot ocean-going tugboat. Because we were in Canadian waters, this mission, known as Sweetclover 5, although many documents turn the words around and call it Clear Sweep 5, say that, you know, when it happened, the Americans came up the week before and laid a course of dummy mines, right? And these were British proximity mines. You didn't have to actually hit them for them to go off. Now, these weren't the real thing. They didn't explode, but what they would do was record that you would have set one off, right? So the U.S. came up without showing us, and they laid an 8-mile dog-leg course outside Shelburne Harbor. And they had some liberty at shore in Halifax. The ships all sailed down from Halifax and got set up so they could do this. And the goal of the mission was the Canadian American minesweepers had to go in and sweep it for mines and locate them or remove them. And after that, 2 large ships would pass through. And if they could pass through the 8-mile course and not discover any mines or not have set one off, the mission would have been a success. And this was the hope of this training mission back in 1960. Well, the large Canadian ship was the command ship of the mission because we were in Canadian waters. There was only a 12-mile international limit in those days, and lots of Russian subs just off the shore, but not inside that. And of course, that would be very unlikely with 20 NATO ships there. But anyway, you had, they were in Canadian waters of Shelburne Harbor, the outer harbor, and you had 10 Canadian ship, or 8 Canadian, 10 American. The big Canadian ship was the Cape Scott, which was a floating NATO command center. It was a factory vessel made to do repairs. It was a supply ship like future supply ships, but it was larger and had these other missions. The large ship the Americans sent up was the USS Orleans Parish. And these 2 ships were meant to pass through this path. They attempted to do this on October the 12th, 1960, and they started in. And while they were only about an hour and a half into the course, they noticed a couple mines, and they were getting strange readings from below on the sonar and on other equipment, the hydrophones. So they sent some divers down. And when the divers went down, they called up the top side and said that there was two USOs. Well, they would have called them UFOs then, or they probably would have said something like flying saucers sitting on the seabed, and that they were seeing there was activity there. When they asked them what the activity is and what the hell are you talking about, they're saying, well, there's live aliens in the water. Well, at first, up topside, they're not believing this and think the drivers are acting up or just pulling some stunt. But eventually they convince them, and the diver said all heck broke loose. And I can remember in my interview notes from 1994 that when I looked at them, that they describe in detail. Everyone was given a sidearm. Alarms were sounding. The men were getting kind of panicky as to what was going on. They were in only 42 feet of water at the time and dropped anchor, and there were no Russian subs or anything. If there had been, you could have looked over the side and probably seen the conning tower, right? But this is what the divers were telling the commanders. And they sent a guy down, and he supposedly filmed this with a special camera. I interviewed this guy face to face and some of the other divers, and they swear it happened. And what happened then was the mission just stops, and the ships stay there for days, not moving over the site, just holding station, and it becomes a mission of observation only. Now, contact is made with Maritime Command in Halifax. The admiral that had designed this mission is flown out to the ship and lands on the Cape Scott, which was one of the few ships that in those days could accommodate a helicopter. In fact, you could even land one of the large Labrador helicopters on them. And he's flown out there and has what they call a hot wash-up meeting with the Americans. And according to what I found in the ship's log is that of course, deck logs are particularly dry reading. You could sink an enemy ship and it won't exactly say that. They just give you the barest of facts, in the most plain language. But the one that struck me was when I'm looking at the defense readiness and I see a special stamp in there and signed at the captain and the log, and it's got assumed DEFCON 1. Now, you don't need clearance with that to lob a nuke or something. Now, there was no nukes there, but you know what? As we now know, they did have nukes stored at the Shelburne base 2 nautical miles away. But, I mean, they very quickly lowered that status too, but the ship sat there. The mission just stops from what it was supposed to be doing. The admiral's flowing out there, and the rest is what we're told to be by the divers, and they said it was extremely tense. These guys stuck by what they were doing. After that, they just had drop cameras and watched this and filmed it. When the mission was over, these films were taken and driven to Dartmouth, Nova Scotia, and handed over to Defense Research Establishment Atlantic, which is on Grove Street in Dartmouth. And that's the last we know where they were. They were observed by people like Dr. Mace Coffey, who's written about both in the Shag Harbour book and in Sweetclover 5 about Shelburne, who's another mysterious character we hear very little about, who was very involved with UFOs. In fact, in 1967, when Shag Harbour happened, Dave, the guy who was in charge of Maritime Command, Commander Rex Guy, another guy I talked to and interviewed at length face to face, would not take the job unless he could go over to the Defense Research Establishment and take Mace Coffey for 5 years and build an office for him right next to his. Because, like he said, if there was something that couldn't be found, like a Russian sub or a UFO or whatever, he said, this is the guy you wanted in there. And this was the guy who handled the search for Shag Harbour. And unfortunately, I didn't get to interview him because a couple of years after that incident, he went to the Philippines to act as the scientific advisor for the military there to the chief of defense staff, and died of a first and last heart attack. But he's quite a character. He gets a whole chapter in the Impact to Contact book called In Search of Mace Coffee. Very eccentric guy. He's buried up on Beechy Island up in the high Arctic with before we discovered the ships from the Franklin expedition, with the few men that they had discovered back then that perished on that island. That's where he wanted to be buried, you know. Yeah, very interesting guy, very eccentric.
I want to ask you, where is that video now, do you think?
Well, that's a good question. And I don't know, of course, but these guys insist that they did it. I'll tell you the level of detail when they told me the story, Dave. They said that, look, they were sent to shore in a launch and met at Shelburne, and they were given an Army deuce and a half that had a name. It was called Old Sid, and they drove the film to Dartmouth and handed it off to Coffey and Jason Greenblatt, 2 PhDs there, right? Now, I can tell you, Greenblatt would not talk about it to me. I attempted to broach it with him. For all the success I've had a lot of doors closed in my face, let me tell you, over the years, of course, right? But I can tell you that Mace Coffey's daughter, Marcia Coffey, she at the time was in university, and she talked about when she would come home and walk with her father would tell her, he says, I wish I could tell you what I've seen at work. He says, but I know 100% we're not alone. We have confirmation. That's what he used to tell his daughter who was in university.
So with Canada's push with Dr. Mona Niemer and the Sky Canada project, wouldn't this be a smoking gun video if it's still somewhere deep in the Canadian archives on this?
Yeah, it might be. I mean, but then again, here's something else where you got to look into the history. And here's some of the possibilities, Dave. Some of them aren't pretty. Yes, that could still be sitting there. Do they even know they have it? Well, that may sound kind of stupid or silly, but, you know, maybe the fellow who was handling this pulled a Phil Corso, as I like to say, and kept these things in the drawer or took them home, right? And you might say, how could he get away with that? Doesn't that seem unlikely? Well, let me tell you something about that facility. And you can look this up even now, even on Wikipedia, you'll find this to be true, is that when the Defense Research Board was put together in 1947, done by Oman Salant, right? He had a tough time doing this. He had a tough time convincing the Air Force to be part of it, to be part of a central government military research thing, right? When he approached the Navy's like, nah, we'll pass, man. Not interested. We've been doing our own military research since the mid-40s and World War II, which was quite true, including investigating UFOs, by the way. Not very well known, but quite certain, and they drew some strange conclusions. They had a UFO program. And in fact, you know, when you see the Shag Harbour documents, you know, the telexes that went between the bases, you know, you see that standard form the Air Force used with all the military jargon, and they were done up by telex. If you look at the bottom of all of them, you'll see it looks like the number 120, and looks like it's written on with a smudgy bowling alley pencil, right? That's the Navy's number for it, the case. Okay, that's how they did it. Because see, they didn't have to interface with the public; they did their own thing. But let's go back to that little facility where they took the film. If you look up now when you read about Research Development Canada there on, say, Wikipedia, I mean, you'll see they have several facilities across the country, and it'll mention the one in Dartmouth, and it'll recount the history of how it started out as, you know, the Naval Research Establishment, then it became the Defense Research Establishment Atlantic, you know, all these various rebrandings and that, right? Well, to get them, what you won't find there, but what I found, and, you know, it's all footnoted in Sweetclover 5, is that to bring them into the Defense Research Board, Dr. Salant had to promise a lot. He basically had to give them complete autonomy because they just wouldn't do it any other way. They said, look, you're going to mess it all up. We've got a great system for defense research, And what he agreed to in the end, get this, is kind of unique. And a lot of scientists nowadays would probably be quite jealous. But I'm told that in a fashion, it largely still is modeled after that, not as pure as it was. Here's how it used to work, is that if the Navy wanted something like, we need a better torpedo, we need this, we need that, right? They would work on it. When they weren't working on that, they could do pure research. And the research they worked on was chosen by the bench scientists themselves. The managers at that facility, and nobody in the government could tell them what to do. The only thing they were responsible to was the budget at the end of the year with the Treasury Board. And this continues there. And if you look at the setup nowadays at Research and Development Canada, you look at the different institutes like at Valcartier and across the country, the Suffield Experimental Air Station. When you look at it, it'll tell you there that, they have some unique functions. And one of them, listen, I love this term, is knowledge management for the public. Well, they had a free hand to do what they wanted.
And I can understand and appreciate that. But as we got about 2 minutes to go here, disclosure seems to be moving, if you believe in disclosure, moving at a forward pace more so than it has in decades regarding this. And with you being Canadian, me being Canadian, us broadcasting mostly to American listeners here, is there a role that Shag Harbour or other areas have to play in this conversation that haven't come out yet?
Well, yes. I mean, just for example, think about, in the Shelburne case, what the value of this film could be, even if it's poorly shot or whatever. And they also collected artifacts and some debris from one of these things. They believe one of these craft was aiding the other in a repair, is what the men thought, but the activity before they were yanked out of the water, right? Certainly useful things could be derived from that, of high value. And, that's as early as 1960. And of course, you look back at some of the claims of others where they say that some of the presidents that were given this confidence and were, released this from the intelligence community were those early presidents like Kennedy, like Ike. Eisenhower was still president, by the way, when this happened. It's that far back, right? And some people have told me that, ironically, some of the last people to be told were Nixon and Ford, where the intelligence community let them have full access, right? It's probably, some people tell me it is like the movie Independence Day, not a great movie, but the Bill Pullman character, you always remember that line where he says, how come I don't know about this, sir? You don't have enough security clearance. And he's
right.
President.
I'm going to get you to hold on right there, because when we return on Spaced Out Radio after our break, we're going to get to some audience questions, and we're going to find out more what Chris thinks about the whole disclosure movement. Is it moving in the right direction, or are we still far away from whatever truth is out there? This is Spaced Out Radio. Stay tuned.
You're listening to Spaced Out Radio with your host, Dave Scott.
All right, we are clear. You're fantastic, my friend. Just fantastic.
I have to tell you something, Dave. You know how you said to me before we went on, when you gave me the phone call, you said, as far as UFO cases, this is your favorite case. You know who you share that with, believe it or not? The late Phil Klass.
Oh, really?
He told me that himself when we spoke together a couple times. Yeah. Once in North
I
Carolina,
think,
once in Trenton, New Jersey. I remember it quite well. He approached me after and said, man, something did happen there. He said, and you need to keep going at it.
and I think if we somehow could figure out a way to open up the doors, not only on Shag Harbour, but the other one as well. Why is it all of a sudden missing my name? Why am I missing the name?
Shelburne.
Shelburne, yeah. If we
Yeah.
could open up the doors on both of those,
Mhm.
that would push this subject big time. The problem that we have is, Chris, I mean, you and I are names in this field. I mean, you can add Grant Cameron in there, or Victor Vigiani, or even the late Stanton Friedman, God
Yeah,
bless his.
Victor called me a while ago, and we've been talking behind the scenes. Like, I don't know how much he wants me to say yet, but he came to me because nobody's been behind the veil as far as I have in terms of getting people to talk to me. That
Yeah.
know something. And I want to check with him before I say a lot about that. But maybe the next time, if you have me back, I want to.
Yeah.
He's trying to talk me into something, and in the past, I've kind of like, oh, you guys, I wish you all the best, but that's not me. But I think we're finding common ground now. We need each other here.
Yes.
Hmm.
I would totally agree with that. And I like Victor. I think Victor is a
Yeah,
good guy, and his
yeah,
heart
I
is
do.
definitely in the right
Yeah,
place.
but this has just been in the last few days, honestly, and I'd like to check with him before, but maybe next
Yeah,
time.
not a problem. Not a
But yeah,
problem.
but I'm hoping he's got some great ideas of proceeding and doing something a little different than the Americans, how they went at it, right?
Yeah.
And I'm quite willing to help with them.
What we need to find is, and it sounds so cliche, we need to find that specific Canadian who has deep pockets, who wants to take a big run at this story.
Yeah. I mean, I've done all this over the years with no money, man. Just
No, I know you have, and
yeah. And although the government, I don't know if you know that I talked about it the first time last year in Yarmouth at the conference. They tried to buy me off in '94 here. I named what member of parliament, his staff called me, and oh yeah, I've kept it quiet till now, but it was somebody who was running the office for
well,
Paul
save
Zed.
that. We're gonna bring that on the air. Are you okay with that?
Yeah, I'm okay with it. Yeah.
Okay, we'll bring that up. Just save that story. We'll bring that up here in a couple minutes.
Hmm.
But yeah, I mean, like in the U.S., I know there are a lot of big pocket people privately who are trying to get some information or building their own research teams, and it's more than just Brandon Fugel at Skinwalker or Peter Thiel or Jesse Michaels. It's there's a lot of people getting into this. We just, the only guy I know is some really, Grant Cameron knows this really wealthy dude in Manitoba who has deep pockets, and he loves this subject. But there has to be more. This has to be a little bit more of open dialogue and conversation.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
And if you find that person, then you're good.
Well,
Then you're good.
I'll tell you, when I was early in Shag Harbour, why they would want to offer me money to stop and hand over everything I had, never made sense to me, and it never did till I got into Shelburne, and that's what they were afraid I was going to find. I know now. But I only started talking about that last year. It's not in the book, but I named who it was. I didn't say who the worker was because I'm sure people make his life miserable. But he worked for Paul Zed, who was a member for St. John Funday in New Brunswick at the time, a liberal.
Yeah.
Yeah, offered me $50,000 to stop.
Oh, wow.
In
Well, let's get into this.
94.
We're going to come back in 20 seconds. Big thank
No.
you to our new YouTube members, Emperor Penguin, Amy, Flat Six, and Marie. Thank you to Michelle and Kitty Caddywhack for our lone super chats of the night. We greatly appreciate your love. Audience questions coming up next. Here comes the second half of Spaced Out Radio tonight. My name is Dave Scott. Thank you for tuning us in wherever you are on this beautiful planet we call Earth. Hey, we want to remind all of you that if you've missed portions of this show or others, our archives are always free on any major podcast network or on YouTube. Our website, spacedoutradio.com. We have a plethora of features for you. Rock out to Bumblefoot, read the news wire, check out our swag as well. You can follow us on X at Spaced Out Radio, Instagram at Spaced Out Radio Show, and on Patreon in the Space Travelers Club. Final time tonight, we say hello to Chris Stiles. He is a foremost leading expert on the Shag Harbour UFO incident in Nova Scotia. And Chris, we are so thankful to have you here tonight. You know, we wanted to talk about more audience questions that we're going to take here momentarily, but you said something during the break that I wanted to get into detail with you.
Mm-hmm.
A couple of decades ago, there were Canadian officials trying to buy you off to stop talking about this subject. Please go into detail about this.
Well, let me tell you that. I'll let you decide whether they were the officials or not. I got a call one time. This is way back in 1994. And this guy called and said, you know, he was a fan and all this, and, you know, didn't sound like anything serious. And he said, I want to do some business with you. He said, I want to buy all your files and let me take over the case and just, you know, whatever. And I'm serious and I'm willing to pay. And I laughed at him and I said, well, I said, everything I got at that time, this was early on in the development of the case. I said, look, I can tell you how to get them, you know. I mean, why would I stop? I said, and there's no need for money. This stuff's available. I said, other than for this, in those days, the stamp or the copy costs or whatever. I said, you tell me what you want, I'll send it and I'll tell you how to get it and where I'm hoping to get more. No. I really want what you got. I just want to buy the work and go on from there. And, you know, he told me his name at the time. Now, you know, I didn't take it very seriously. And he called back. There were several calls and he kept doing this. And one time he said, well, like, you know, have you made any money? He said, I seen what you did on that show, Sightings with Fox. And I said, actually, it was a Paramount production, but Fox distributed it and that, you know. And I said, he said, well, what is it you hope to do with this? And I can remember saying to him, I'd like to think there's life after high school. I'm having a great time. It's better than collecting stamps. Why would I stop? I said, what? So I could get another $2,000 or $3,000 like Paramount offered me to spend a couple weekends and shoot or something. No. He said, we'll have to sit down and hammer it out, but I'm thinking more like 50. I said, 50K, and I laughed at him. I said, yeah, okay. I wasn't taking him very seriously. And he kept giving, every time he called, he'd give me another phone number. And I had about 6 of them. And I realized they were Ottawa numbers. So I figured he's in the Ottawa area. And he did tell me his name. So one day I called one of the numbers just to see what answered. And to my surprise, it was the office of Paul Zed, a Liberal member in the center block of the House of Commons. Well, that kind of threw me. And I asked him about that the next time he called back with another offer. And I said, well, no. He said, this is just me. This is just me acting on my own. He said, yes, I work for Paul Zed. I run his office here in Ottawa. And, it was very strange. These calls persisted for some time. I still have the phone book with all the numbers written down in them here. And again, he asked me, what is it you hope to do? And I said, well, if you need any help, you want to get them, whatever. Eventually the calls stopped. make of it. Now, is that the hand of government? I can't say it was that. I can say that the guy calling, wanting to call with me, wanting me to go to Ottawa, wanting me to do all this, and that offered me, he was suggesting it was much more money than I made. And I'm not sure I've made that money since then. This is largely a hobby to me. I'm a part timer. But at the time, especially back then, it was all new to me. I was like a kid in a candy store. Nothing could be better. I wasn't going to give it up for any amount of money. This was, like I said, was there life after high school? Yes, there was, and then nowadays people say, well, was it worth it? Is there life after Shag Harbour? I said, yeah, there's Shelburne. I've been lucky with that. So I spoke about that openly last year because there's so much talk and you hear these stories and it's always from Commander X. I don't like to name the actual individual because I'm sure people track him down and hound him and that, right? But maybe, I don't know if Paul Zed's retired. I know he was elected after that in some terms, but I don't know if he wants to check into that or whether that was on the resume or that's upsetting to him or not. But no, I certainly got these calls. The guy certainly sounded serious. And when I called back the number and found who he worked for, that gave me pause. Now, at the time, I think that was the first time the MP Paul Zed was elected. I don't think he was the minister of anything with or without portfolio or whatever. And, it was at the time, honestly, I never really took it serious because whether it was government or not government, or somebody offered money, as much as I could have used the money, I was like, no, man, this is better. Really, I was committed, right? I was hardcore, and I had so many preconceptions. And of course, some of them, I got my nose rubbed in and some of them turned out to be wrong. But, where else can you play Sherlock Holmes without a PhD? You know what I mean? And the interesting thing was I found I had the respect of many of those PhDs and that. And I think it was just that persistence pays off. And I'd like to think I learned from my mistakes and tried not to repeat them. But yeah, that's a funny thing. I never fanned that flame for a long time. I'm not fanning the flame now. But it comes out because I can't remember. There were some speakers last year at our annual conference we have in Yarmouth every year. This year we're having one there the 3rd, 4th, and 5th, which is the actual anniversary date there right in the middle. And what's cool about that, Dave, is, on the 4th, like we have all the talks, I'll be the last speaker of the day. And the next day we put people on buses and we go right to the crash site and point it out. The Coast Guard does the demo. They come up with a ship, right? And it actually ends at the Shelburne base. It's closed now, but the buildings are all still there. And we usually enter the gate and I stand up on one of the concrete blocks there and point out the island. You can see where that Shelburne operation was and tell the whole story, right there. And that's the end of the conference, right? And it's a great, anybody that wants to check that, Shag Harbour UFOexpo.com, but yeah, I'd like to think that somebody in the private sector would love to fund me for that, but it never stopped me. You did what you could. I've always enjoyed, I think, the respect and the help of a lot of good people in the UFO organizations, people that are on the opposite side of the fence from me, and that was probably did me a lot more good and caused a lot more success than simply to throw a wad of cash at me would have done. But it happened.
To me, it sounds like they were trying to buy you off. Here's the thing. A political aide does not have the power or the authority to make decisions like that or just throw out snowballs hoping that you're going to catch one. You know what I'm saying?
Of course, I was also wondering, I mean, he sounded serious, but is this some kind of grandiose behavior? I don't know. But when I called those numbers and found that I was getting, the host of comments, right, it did give me pause. That's all I can say. But I find there was so much of that back in that point in time in the field. I'm just like, yeah, I didn't want anything to sort of muddy the waters, right? It was like, one of the reasons in the beginning, I didn't want to pursue the Shelburne case. It took me 29 years. And at first I was death on it because I thought, oh no, I was going to have this nice, great UFO crash scenario with all the documents and no controversy, avoid all the problems and pitfalls that they'd encountered in Roswell. Wow, and then you learn the reality and the mess of it all. Often I describe it as the dog's breakfast, but still, persistence pays off. You learn from your mistakes, keep at it, get as personal as possible, get those interviews from the people who are really there and push their buttons if you have to, and you'll come up with the data, And there's a lot of things that were worth the wait, things like space object contingency plan. I think about all these cases I hear about down east where the Americans rolled into Newfoundland and took over the town, investigated the UFO case, and people said, and other researchers used to tell me, well, that just doesn't happen. And then when I finally got the RCMP to release the space object plan, I love the second title of it, under that, also known as the master plan. There's a regrettable title, I'm sure, from their perspective. But when you read that, it tells you quite clearly, like that until Canadian Armed Forces is on the scene, if the Americans roll in, they can ask for an RCMP escort, for any bona fide U.S. agency. Doesn't matter if it's FBI, CIA, whatever, the Air Force, right? And they'll take you to a crash site and do all the rules are in there. Who decides how far downwind you got to be, who gets to drag away a corpse, right? It's all in there, And for years, the Mounties used to deny they had it. And one day I got a corporal to slip up on the phone and got her to give me the file number. And I had to negotiate. And eventually the chief archivist, Sergeant Maurice Laferriere, called me and said he could help me, but it would have to be done outside the act. And he gave me the rules and details. And I said, well, I'll put it to you this way. I said, Sergeant, I said, as long as I get verbal updates once a month on the phone, I see no reason to complain to the Information Commissioner of Canada. Do we have an understanding? And true to his word, he did that. And when they released it, there were no redactions. And, they bore the cost of the photocopying and sent it to me, something that National Archives never did, and they released it, and it was great. And it answered a lot of questions, and just one of the other gifts, there were many little things like that came out of the Shag Harbour incident, So,
right. I want to get some audience questions here. Let's start off with T-Bone here, who is asking, this is going back a little bit in the show, were samples of the yellow seam foam taken and tested?
No, there was an attempt to take them. One of the fishermen, Norman Smith, tried to grab some in a fine dip net, but it would just dissipate in the net, unfortunately not, but there was an attempt to do that. Yes.
All right. Next question comes from Jules. Did they track a UFO underwater to the ocean during Shag Harbour?
Well, there's no doubt that Shelburne would have been able to track it. The equipment was very sensitive. They used to actually listen to the explosive bolts going on the Mercury capsules when they'd splash down off Florida from Shelburne, right? And they would use Shelburne data in case there was ever, it had already been set up if, one of the incoming capsules in the Mercury program had, been miscalculated and landed far offshore beyond radar, or a visual sighting. They were set up to triangulate where it hit. They'd tell them to set off one of the explosive bolts, and they'd be able to triangulate it from the SOSA stations to Shelburne. So they had that kind of sensitivity. So no doubt, if anything was moving in the water, just a couple miles from the base, they would have been able to track it. At the time, remember, this was controlled largely by the U.S. and it was a time of great security. I've heard great descriptions of how sensitive it was when you're in there, that even people with top security clearances, when they were near the plotters, if they had to walk through the room, sheets would be held up so they couldn't see the screens,
All right, let's move on to another question. Back to T-Bone here. Was there radar on or airplane radio about the incidents?
Well, the night before the Shag Harbour incident on October 3rd, there was a near collision with a U.S. flight, a cargo flight that had left JFK and was coming across the Gulf of Maine. And a set of lights, exactly the same description as that of the Shag Harbour incident, dropped down in front of the plane, in front of the nose, and was pacing them, but the plane was slowly gaining on it. And the whole time they were in radio communication with Boston Center. And as they got within half a mile of this, they were about to come out of autopilot and do an evasive maneuver when suddenly this thing sped ahead and angled up and went out of the atmosphere. That was on October the 3rd, 67. I interviewed the co-pilot and the flight engineer. Ralph Lowinger was the co-pilot and Michael Littlepage was the flight engineer. The co-pilot actually flew himself up to Nova Scotia. He was a career Pan Am pilot, could fly for free, and I interviewed him at length, and we spent considerable time together talking about what happened. And they were convinced it was a UFO. But that they didn't paint it on radar, by the way, to answer that question. And neither did the ground. And although it was showing the Boeing jetliner, and it showed a refueling mission of SAC 20,000 feet lower and behind them. They were at 33,000 feet. And like I say, about to go across the pond, right? And behind, they were right at what was known as the Davies intersection over the Gulf of Maine. That's the point where back in the day, aircraft were handed off from U.S. control to Moncton Center for air traffic control.
I love it. I absolutely love it. I mean, there has to be. Well, let me ask you this. Let me put the question this way. When you have searched, and I think anybody who has had a bigger shovel than you when it comes to Shag Harbour, I think, or Shelburne, is I don't think they're out there. I really don't. And if you can't find it, I know it has to be hidden.
No,
so
I found things that were hidden. not the.
But what I'm saying though, Chris, in regards to that, and I apologize for cutting you off. But what I'm saying here is, if you had the magic crystal ball to try and find the smoking gun video, the smoking gun reports, or whatever it may be, to show that these incidents were true, it wasn't humanoid, whatever was in the ocean or in the water, where would you look? Who do you think is holding on to those?
If I had to guess, I would say rogue intelligence people. And by rogue, I don't mean like they're just acting against orders, but it's like when I talk about, when you look at the history, for example, of the setup that Grove Street had here in Dartmouth, the Defense Research Establishment Atlantic. They were given a free hand. They were answerable to nobody. I think people within the intelligence community that get there, particularly in the old days, you had a lot of these longer lasted professionals that held positions for a long time, and I think they just self-appointed themselves, or there were people that did that. The trouble is, where does it end up? Does it end up in some warehouse like you see at the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark? Is it home in their attic? Like, what did they do, right? They're responsible to almost no one, or somebody who doesn't care. I mean, and there's something that's hard, for people like you and me and many of your audience to comprehend. Remember, I talked about Mace Coffey and the fellow that took charge of Maritime Command of daily operations. He said, I'm not taking the job without him, right? And, they yanked him out of the little brick building on Grove Street and took him over to Maritime Command, built him an office right by the guy running daily operations. Okay. But, when you talk to Rex Guy and say, so what did you think about, Here, let me tell you this. This puts it in perspective. When I first was interviewing Rex Guy, and I said, yeah, and I said, I was surprised. Mace lived at 48 Hazelhurst Street here in Dartmouth, and right down by the waterfront, and the tracks were so narrow there. It's been filled in with dirt recently. They're reclaiming land from the harbor. I don't know why. There's plenty of land here, but anyway, what happened was. I said, I often wish when I ran down at the age of 12, I said I was only a couple houses away, just near past that warehouse was his house. If he saw what I saw in the backyard when I saw the orange orb go by. And Rex says, yeah, he did. And I was like, what? Because remember, he died and I never got one of the few I could never interview. I said, you're sure? And he says, oh, yeah, he saw it. So when he came in the next morning, he said, buddy, you're going to love this. And he tore off the telex and handed them the reports on Shag Harbour. They're coming asking for the underwater search, right? And when he did that, yes, Mace was excited. And he said, you're not going to believe this. He says, I had one in my backyard last night. But he said this didn't interest him. And when I asked him about the Shelburne case and that, I said, well, what did you guys think? Oh, he said, we just turned them over to the eggheads. I had no interest in that. As long as something didn't threaten a mission or that minesweeping mission, we didn't care. These guys actually, many of them had no interest. Some of them, yes, did. And I know it's hard for us to picture that, but, true specialists, and it makes me think of these astronomers when somebody runs in the room and says, come on out right now, everybody here, there's a UFO outside, and the astronomer doesn't go look, right?
I would love to know whether the Canadian forces are holding on to this, or if it's NAV Canada, Transport Canada, Coast Guard, RCMP.
Well, anything that would potentially be of military intelligence, I think, would be handled by
CSIS?
No, by military intelligence. CSIS gave up that responsibility about 11 years ago, and it's gone to you know how we've all heard of JTF2. There's a division under that called JTFX. They actually have a shoulder badge and everything. And the reason I discovered that was checking the shoulder badges issued on the Governor General's website. Yes, JTFX. Yeah, there is such a thing, Joint Task Force X. And if it's a military matter, now they're not just sitting there looking at UFO cases or anything. Mostly it would have to do with intelligence or leaks or dealing with that or having to send a man in the field. But if it was a UFO case and it spills over to be of military or intelligence concern, that's who would handle it, I would think. I have not had confirmation of that, but they've taken over that role, I know, when it spills into military intelligence. I don't know who currently is in charge. It used to be General Michael Wright. It's something I've never quite got around to yet, and I don't know what they would answer. I mean, military intelligence, and the thing is, we could contribute a lot to that in Canada because, right now there's not much we can contribute to NATO. We don't have the hardware or the stuff, but you know what? We're valued as one of the Five Eye partners, right?
Yes.
And we have that huge facility they built outside Ottawa. Well, I mean, so that would be how you would deal with that in this country like that, I would think, just from when you look at what their mission is, when you read it is, but I've heard people tell me about that and say they've seen these people sometimes in the offices and archives in Ottawa. And I kept saying, oh, how do you tell? Did you see his shoulder badge? And I was trying to figure it out one day, and I went to the Governor General's site because that's who has to okay those things in the military.
Yes.
Sure enough, there was one for JTFX.
Chris, I want to say a big thank you for coming on Spaced Out Radio. We encourage all of our listeners to go to Amazon, look up your books. Chris Stiles, just type his name in there. Coming up next, Swamp Dweller. Then after that, Extra Small Lee Strauss will join us for the cryptid Q&A. We appreciate you tuning us on Spaced Out Radio, Hour 3.
You're listening to Spaced Out Radio with your host, Dave Scott.
Chris, thank you very much for
Yeah.
joining us tonight and staying up late. It was so much fun to hear you, man.
Yeah. Okay. I got to go down the Annapolis Valley tomorrow, so I think I'm going to call it a night, Dave. But thanks for thinking of me and the invite. Appreciate it.
We will do it
And
again. And anytime you want to talk some Canadian UFOs, get a hold of me. You got my number.
yeah, and like I say, I'll let you know. I'm going to talk to Victor and a few other
Yep.
people. I'm always working on something here and see
Sure.
what they are before I go. But yeah, no, it was a slice, man. All right, we'll see you again, my friend.
Take care, my friend. Chris Stiles, everybody. Great guy. I'll be right back. All right, we got a minute left. Bring in extra small Lee Strauss. Thank you to our brand new members of our Spaced Out Radio channel. We have Amy, we have Emperor Penguin, Flat Six, and Marie. Thank you. And thank you to Amy, Michelle, and Kitty for the great super chats tonight. We greatly appreciate your love and support on this show on a nightly basis. So thank you very much. And extra small, I don't know if you've noticed, but we got some new Bigfoot swag on the store.
Well, you know I'm going to have to go look at that.
Oh, I'm going to be getting one of those new Bigfoot t-shirts that I got.
Did you see mine?
I did.
Yeah.
I did.
Yep.
Yep. All right, everybody. Here we go in 3 seconds. Hard to believe we're already in hour 3 of Spaced Out Radio tonight. My name is Dave Scott. Great to have you with us as we love bringing these weird, strange, unbelievable stories to you on a nightly basis. Hey, we want to remind all of you that if you've missed portions of this show or others, you can check out our free archives on YouTube or any major podcast network. Our website, spacedoutradio.com. We have a plethora of features for you. Rock out to Bumblefoot, read the news wire, check out our swag as well. Follow us on X at Spaced Out Radio, Instagram at Spaced Out Radio Show, and on Patreon in the Space Travelers Club. The Desert Clam has set the password for tonight in the SOR Space Travelers Club. Venisect. Venisect is your password. Use it wisely, Space Travelers, as the Clam sets the password each and every night right here on Spaced Out Radio. Let's head to the swamp.
Hello and welcome to Spaced Out Radio's Swamp. I'm Swamp Dweller, and tonight I'm going to take you on a mystic journey of the unknown, sharing tales of monsters, legends, and nightmares. Welcome to the Spaced Out Radio Swamp. A few years ago, I had to commute for my job from October 2018 to January of 2019. It was nothing special. A retail job, but I lived in a rural area in the California foothills, and it was my only option at the time. I would be driving home every night at around 11 p.m. to 2 a.m., depending on when I would get off from work. The highway was always deserted at these times, and some nights were more peculiar than others, but nothing so extreme as this story. It wasn't uncommon for me to see a lot of wildlife on these drives. I would just take it slow and be alert. Black-tailed deer, coyotes, raccoons, I was well accustomed to them at this point. One night, I was only about 10 minutes away from home. I rolled up to my usual four-way stop. I'd stopped at hundreds of times before. It was probably around 1 a.m., not a soul around, completely dead quiet. As I came to a complete stop, I saw something standing just off the side of the road, across from the intersection. It was obviously an animal, but it was headed towards the road, so I was going to wait for a second to see if it was going to cross. It took me a second to really comprehend what it was at first. I thought it was a horse, which, although dangerous, wouldn't be that uncommon for where I live due to their irresponsible ranchers and their constantly broken fences. Then, as I started to be able to make out more of its detail, as it neared the light from my headlights, I realized something was wrong about this animal. It was tall, so much so that the legs looked stilt-like. As I sat there, shocked, it slowly stepped into the road across from my car and into the direct beam of my headlights. At this point, I realized two things. One, it was taller than my car. And two, its gait was very odd, almost like it didn't know how to properly walk as a deer should. It was like its joints wanted to bend in the wrong way. It slowly moved into the oncoming lane and then swiveled its head to look at me. All the hair rose in my body. What spooked me the most was it was certainly a deer, or at least something that really looked like one. It looked normal in every way except the spider-like legs it was standing on. At this point, I gassed it, and the deer stood unmoving as my car sped past. I investigated my rearview mirror and caught a glimpse of it, crossing the oncoming lane back onto the shoulder of the highway, illuminated red by my brake lights. When I got home, I ran from my car to my house and locked myself in, still understandably freaked out. I never saw it again. And ever since I've been listening to this show, I've heard tons of other stories of people seeing these weird deer creatures in this exact area on this show. At this point, I've become desensitized to it. It wasn't until recently that I learned about the not deer creatures, and it makes me wonder, what is going on?
All right, big thanks to Swamp Dweller for another creepy story. If you want more just like that, head on over to YouTube, type in Swamp Dweller, hit subscribe, ring that bell, and you get right to it. Speaking of YouTube, if you are a follower on our YouTube channel, even if you're on the radio side of things listening in, but you follow us on YouTube as well, we do have a new membership, which will bring you into private conversations with our Spaced Out Radio hosts, including yours truly, as well. Over time, we're going to have some more fun stuff for you as well. With that, let's bring in Lee. Sweet Lee, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing fantastic after one heck of a day.
Yeah, well, for people who don't know, Lee is a site foreman for many construction areas in Washington State, and he decided to play tractor earlier today.
Oh, that was not me. No.
Now you're deflecting that.
I'm not deflecting. Oh, no. Well, anyway, one of my dirt guys hit an 8-inch water main, and you would not believe how much water can come out of an 8-inch pressurized water main. Holy crap.
Did you have a free shower?
Yeah, and I think everybody around, there was 2 other guys that were in the ditch when it happened. So, yeah, it's pretty impressive.
Were you filming a 7-Up commercial?
No, but I did take some slow-mo video after it was already broken because it was epic. Just epic.
Nice.
Yeah.
Everybody safe? Everybody happy?
Everybody's safe. Nobody got hurt, thank God. We're good. We're good. It's all fixed now.
Beautiful. Beautiful. I want to get into something that I talked about on the Dave 101 recently, and that is the great debate about the Tic Tacs. You know, for the last few weeks, you know, since Ross Coulthart made it public that he believes the Tic Tacs were made by Lockheed Martin and Lockheed Skunk Works, and that they are American-made, great old American-made technology. Here's something that nobody is really talking about, and that is, what if they're both? What if they're American-made? And what if they're alien? So 2 different craft, still shaped the same. It's kind of like if you look at every mid-size SUV on the road these days, whether it's Toyota, whether it's Honda, Mazda, Hyundai, Ford, GM. Well, no, GM still makes ugly vehicles. Okay. But I don't know. The one thing that I've learned about GM over the years, and I'll probably never get a sponsorship from them after saying this, but it's like they have these designers to say, okay, this is the vehicle. How can we make it uglier?
Isn't that the case?
Those front ends on trucks now that look like they're missing teeth, you know, with the big black grill and the spread out eyes, you know, they look like one of those characters off of Lion King or something like that.
Ren and Stimpy, what I was thinking.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Looks like Ren without teeth. That's
there
right.
You go. There you
okay,
go.
That's a Chevy truck for you these days. Ugly as sin.
Sure.
Anyways, it's kind of like SUVs where they all look the same, but they're different makes and models.
Mm-hmm.
The debate has gone on a long time with black triangles, okay, where people believe black triangles are not only of alien technology, but there are some that are human technology. Why couldn't the Tic Tac be the same?
Well, my thought on the Tic Tacs, Dave, is that after all this talk about psionics and the possibility that we may have people in our military that are controlling some of these craft using their minds, that maybe it is a possibility that these Tic Tacs are unmanned and they're being controlled by someone, either maybe incognito on the ship in that case, or maybe at some installation somewhere. It's very possible that way. Yeah.
See, here's my thinking on it. I believe Kevin Day. Kevin Day was the radar operator on the USS Princeton, sailing beside the USS Nimitz. Pardon me, all of a sudden I want to say Constellation, but it wasn't that. It's the Nimitz back in 2004. Kevin was a proud veteran, served 19 years in the Navy, I believe. Okay, loved his career as a radar operator. He is the one who noticed the Tic Tacs on the radar doing things that he had never, ever seen in his life. And when we look at that, I think he made the right call by recommending that they, send up a few FA-18 Hornets from the Nimitz to go intercept these. I don't think he made a wrong decision there. I think what he saw was something that was extremely out of the ordinary, and he felt that he needed to act on that for the sake of safety of the fleet. And why wouldn't you? Yeah. That being said, if it was American technology that was being tested on their own Navy for things like radar, stealth technology, how it would react to different jet fighters, they're not going to know about it.
Right.
They're not going to know what they are looking at. And if they've never seen it before, just like if you and I, if we go back 150 years and all of a sudden somebody drives up in a DeLorean time travel machine, we're not going to know what that is. We're not going to know what a Lamborghini looks like. We're not even going to know what a tractor looks like. And that's what I'm saying with this is, how would we even know if we've never seen it before, whether it would be human or not?
You're correct, sir. We wouldn't know if it was something that Lockheed, built and put together. We wouldn't know, other than the size, whether it was manned or unmanned. We could kind of guess maybe there was somebody inside that thing, but we don't know for sure. We don't know how it was operated. We don't know, the propulsion system that it was using. At least we don't, right? And probably 99% of the people on the Nimitz probably didn't either. But what if there was people embedded on the Nimitz that were watching to see how the crew reacted? Is that a possibility?
Well, the theory is, here's the thing. Whether it was alien or whether it was man-made, we do know this. We do know there is record of a helicopter landing on, I believe, the Nimitz, and then transporting a couple of suits, shall we say. Don't know if they were men in black, but a couple of suits onto the Princeton. And with that happening, they did confiscate the tapes of that incident. Those tapes never have been seen again. They were the radar tapes. They were the visual tapes. Everything was taken. That has been said by all of the crew members who came out. Lou Elizondo and Chris Mellon have said that. So it could go either way. Was it alien or was it man-made from Lockheed Skunk Works? Now, I tend to believe, after my investigation on it, and this has been going on for 18 months, that they are, at least some of them, human technology. Now, whether they're reverse engineered or not from those craft, maybe, maybe not. we have a bunch of brilliant scientists who work for these defense corporations where, let's say, they got a video of a Tic Tac shaped object, or maybe one in a crash retrieval, that they were able to recreate the design. Maybe they already know the science behind the anti-gravitics or the propulsion systems, and they were able to at least make a human clone of that, much like in the 80s when kit cars were in. You know, you could have a Lamborghini, or you could have, for about $100,000 less at the time, a kit car Lamborghini, which really wasn't a Lamborghini. It was more of a Fiero on steroids.
I remember.
Right?
I remember. Yes, I do. Well, you know, we go back to the same thing. The only reason why I think it's possible that we were looking at an alien craft is because it went to the cap point. I mean, we've talked about this many, many times. And maybe the military, or, you know, whoever was running that craft at that time knew where the cap point was, but it changes, right? Every time they go up and do, a session where they're doing war games, that cap point changes. It's not the same every time. So the fact that that craft went to that location, it knew somehow.
So was that alien technology, or was that Lockheed technology testing out because they would have already known that there was training sessions going on there. And the one thing that we don't know is usually the admiral of the ship, or the admiral in the Navy. And I apologize, I'm not familiar with naval rank very, very well. Military rank in general. I'm not a military guy by trade, but thank God for those who do serve. Thank you, veterans out there. We want to give that shout out.
Absolutely.
You know, but somebody in those ranks would have known. Like, imagine if the captain of the USS Nimitz knew about this. Mm-hmm. He would have known about that helicopter be coming onto his ship and landing. He would have known about the people who got off, because he would have to. Mm-hmm. He'd have to clear that. You're not going to clear that through a petty officer.
Right.
The captain of the ship, the rear admiral, the admiral. I apologize for those who have served in the Navy before that I'm probably butchering the rankings here. Okay. But we have to look at the reality of that they must have known. They must have known through that.
Well, I keep thinking about the situations that I've had come up, Dave, where the craft exhibited the ability to do things that I asked it to do, even though it was like, you know, thousands of feet away from me. But the stuff that I said out loud and it did the things that I asked it to do verbally. They've got the technology somehow to read our minds. And, you know, if it's that one instance where you say to yourself, I wonder if I go outside and look up if there's a UFO, and you do go outside and you do look up and there is a UFO, that sort of thing happens to a lot of people. It may not be that exact situation, but they do have, and they have shown it to me and many, many other people. They do have the ability to understand what you're thinking.
100% agree with you. 100% agree. And that's where summoning, or psionics, whatever term you want to use, comes into play, because we are actually seeing that. And if you've ever accomplished it by summoning in a UFO or having it do maneuvers that you would hope that it would do, it is something of amazement. Absolute amazement. I was on the phone one day, Lee, with Eric. We call him the preacher around here. This going back probably 6-7 years ago. And way off in the distance, way off in the distance, I saw one of those flashing, you know, those bright flashes in the sky. And I just said to it, can you come over here, please? Flash. I said, can you come over my house? Well, 19 flashes later, here it is now over top of my house. and it keeps going. And I flashed a couple more times just before it left over top of my house. And then it never flashed again. It's pretty incredible. This thing was probably skywise 30 to 40 miles away.
Oh, yeah.
You know? And it took like 21 flashes from the first one to get over my house.
Yep.
And this was dark time. It was well after sunset. Okay, and the sun's gone down. A couple hours after that. It was after the show, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
So that's usually around 12. Well, our show ends at midnight Pacific. So that was usually around, that would have been around 12:30, 1 o'clock in the morning Pacific time.
Yep.
Not a lot of sun at that time.
There's no, the sun is on the opposite side of the earth, right? You're not going to get any or much, if anything, any bleed over at that time of night. Depending on what time of year it is, of course, but pretty darn sure, Dave, that what you saw was a genuine unknown craft object.
I would agree with you.
Mm-hmm.
I would agree. Now, you've done this before. What's happened when you have summoned?
Oh my gosh, I've got this on video. We were up at Mount Baker, a buddy of mine, and it was actually, we were filming for our first episode, and we were at Baker, and I had all my gear out, and we saw this light appear over Mount Baker, heading away, actually heading towards Canada from Mount Baker. And I said, "Oh, over the mountain." You can hear me say it on the video. And I asked it to flash, and then it glowed pretty bright and then went back down. I said, "Oh my gosh." And I was on the phone with my buddy at the time. I was like, "Oh my gosh, you won't believe what just happened." And I said, "Wait, I'm going to ask for it to flash again." And I said, "Flash again for me." And then it did it again like that. And I said, "Okay, you're going to go out of my camera view here in a couple seconds. Can you give me one more flash before you go out of view?" And this isn't in any interval, right? This is not like, a tumbling satellite or anything. This thing let off a huge flash the third time, just super bright when I asked. And I am giggling like a schoolgirl on the, you can hear me giggling so hard on video. It's just crazy. It was just the most amazing thing, most amazing feeling. And, there's nothing to compare that to. You just had communication with somebody from somewhere else that just showed up here. You know what I mean? That's just, I don't even know what to say. It's powerful.
It is a powerful moment because you question everything. Whether you actually did it, whether you didn't, whether this is a satellite, whether this is the space station, whether it's Venus or Mars. You question everything about it because it doesn't make sense. It's illogical.
It's absolutely illogical. And then you start looking at the science. Now, once you see something like that, okay, how did this work? What happened? What are they picking up on? And that's I'm still in the deep thought about it, but thoughts have energy. We know that, right? So where does that information go and how is it picked up?
Lee, hold on right there. We got another half hour left of the Q&A with extra small Lee Strauss on Spaced Out Radio. Stay tuned, everybody.
This is Spaced Out Radio. Your host, Dave Scott.
What are you, 3 weeks before you come up?
Yep. Looks like 3 weeks away, Dave.
Yeah, I got to find you a nice hotel room.
Oh.
You get to stay at Chateau Dave or Chateau Tim.
That's what I'm wondering. You know, whatever we do, we're going to have to do a Coldplay photo, right? I mean, this is going to have to happen, right? You know what
I
I
am
mean?
so sick of that.
Oh, I know it's everywhere,
Oh,
but you got to
It-
do it. I mean,
oh, you
everybody
have
else
to.
is.
You know what? I'm just going to give the reality break here because, you know, I'm somebody where my, you know, on my first marriage, my ex left me for another dude. Okay. And so I kind of know that feeling a little bit. But the thing that kind of pisses me off about it is everybody's forgetting, man. There's two families that have broken up and a few innocent children who now know that their mom or dad is not a you know, isn't a faithful person, you know, and I find that difficult, you know, and I understand why and how it blew up, but just the way, I mean, you imagine everything going on like that. Here's what I do not agree with, though. Okay, because people are people. People are going to do what they want. There's always going to be cheaters. There's always going to be people who are playing the field or whatever, not as committed as a wedding band says or whatever it may be, and that's their prerogative. But I mean, losing your job over that, I don't agree with that.
Yeah,
I really don't.
You know, both of them worked for the same company, and one was the lady was the HR manager.
Well, that's the biggest mistake he made right there, because you know who's he supposed to file a complaint to now?
Yeah, well, they both got canned. Yeah, it's a pretty big deal. You know, I think both of them, without getting fired, would have had a lot to explain to. You know, they, you know, they're both going to miss a lot of work over this anyway. You know.
Well, they're pretty much done in New York or wherever they were.
Yeah.
They're pretty much done there. You might as well just pack up and leave the state.
Yeah, well, it went nationwide, and who knows how much farther beyond that. So, yeah, them getting a job at all right now is going to be very difficult.
Mm-hmm. I hear you there. I don't get it. I feel for the kids.
Oh yeah, definitely.
You know,
the kids.
It's one thing to find out that one parent is screwing around on another one, or Boston, wherever it is. But it's another thing when it all of a sudden goes viral. And now if you're in high school or whatever, because they had high school age kids, you might as well not even go to high school next year because you're going to be bullied the hell out of that.
Oh yeah, it would be bad. The kids, you know, even today, and I remember when I was a kid, they were relentless. Absolutely. If they could dig their nails into something and get you, that's what was going on.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. You got to change schools. Definitely have to change schools. You know?
I mean, even if they were in sports, you think about other teams harassing. I mean, it could be. Who knows, right? How bad?
Mm-hmm. Anyways, enough about the reality break there. But yeah, we'll try and get that photo of you and Tim doing that.
Absolutely.
Are you coming up on the Friday?
Yeah, I will be leaving here. I'm not going to drive all night, so I'll probably come up. I'll probably start driving around 4 a.m. on. Yeah.
Then we'll do the show live in studio.
There you go, man.
Yeah. And then I'm going to see about taking this. I'm going to try and take the Saturday off my daytime job.
Yeah.
Dave did not have his lunch taken daily in high school. I can guarantee that.
No lunch money stolen either.
All right. Big thank you tonight to Michelle, Jeff Steve Garvey, Amy, and Kitty Caddywhack for the super chats. Greatly appreciate the love, as well as our new memberships with Amy, Emperor Penguin, Flat Six, and Marie Garmon. Thank you very much. Thank you. That also goes along with Mel WD-40, Paramarv, AA Ron, Deborah Rooney, T-Bone, Lil Cam, Walter, Rock and Rory, Matthew Goodka, and Flat 6. Here we go. In like 7 seconds. So thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah. Join today. Here comes the final half hour of Spaced Out Radio. As we've rounded third and we're headed for home tonight. My name is Dave Scott. Thank you very much for joining us. We greatly appreciate earning your listening ears. Hey, we want to remind you that if you missed most of this show or others, check out our free archives by going to YouTube or any major podcast network. Our website, spacedoutradio.com. We have a plethora of features for you. Rock out to Bumblefoot, read the news wire, check out our swag as well. All right, here is Extra Small Lee Strauss. Let's give a shout out to our number one fan in the chat room, the great, the talented, the ever UFO evolving Nicole Sackich. She's number one. Number one. Just give her number one right there. Number one. That's right. That's right. We love her around here. All right. Let's get to some hearings. We heard the hearings may have came as early as this week. They did not show up yet. Now we're here in September. We're hearing they're trying to get a bunch of whistleblowers together and sing humble pie to the government tricks and dastardly deeds of covering up the UFO story. Or UAP, whatever you want to call it. I know Lee loves a good UAPP. And I don't even know where that came from.
I don't either.
Lee, if you were on the congressional board, who would you want, or the type of person you would want? You can name names or just give positions. I don't care.
Oh man,
who would you want on there if you could choose 4 people? Who would you want?
You know, there's been so many great ufologists in the past. Not only that, but whistleblowers. You know, I think that. Gosh, I'm gonna fumble this name. Fire in the Sky.
Travis Walton.
That's what I'm talking about. Is somebody that's people that have experienced UFOs and being abducted and taken and seen the inside of a craft as it's working. People that have actually been around the pilots of these craft. That's the kind of person I would want to talk in front of Congress, right? That's the kind of person that we haven't had yet. They have heard from a myriad of different people, but we have not gone where we need to go. I believe we really need to that quality. That, I mean, you know his story. We all know his story. It's corroborated. You know, they did lie detector tests after lie detector tests, and he's passed so many times. So that's the kind of person we really need in there. And I don't know who else would be considered like him or in his ilk, you know, that type of person. I don't know if there's any other people like that out there.
I would like to see Chris Mellon subpoenaed to the stand because I believe they've tried calling him and he skipped out a couple of times.
Okay.
I'd like to see him on there. He's a former assistant deputy secretary of defense. He's worked in the intelligence community under a couple of different presidents. He was the man and the brains behind the Stars Academy before Tom DeLonge screwed that up.
Yeah.
I'd like to see him. Put him under oath. Let's see what we can find.
Yeah. And
You know who else I'd like to see on there?
yeah.
This is my wild card. While he is still alive, Buzz Aldrin.
Oh, there you go.
Okay, if he is under oath, being the patriot and American that he is, he's not going to lie about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
He's a hero. Now, a lot of people would say, hey, don't taint Buzz over this UFO flap, especially at his age in his 90s now. But what do you got to lose, Buzz? What do you got to lose? If you saw something on the moon, like many NASA people have stated, let's talk about it. I want some Buzz Aldrin on there.
You know, other people that would be good to bring on is somebody that's outside of the U.S., maybe dignitaries from other countries. Not that they can be subpoenaed, but you know, somebody that's high up in let's say the Italian army or something like that would be good to bring in as well. I think maybe even, you know what? Maybe somebody like Steven Spielberg.
Spielberg would be good. I put it out into our chat room on YouTube. Who would you like to see on a hearing panel? And I'm curious who our audience would like to see. Okay, so if you're in our YouTube chat room, you can put in there, and I'm going to read it on out. D. Cypher says, John Ramirez and Hal Puthoff. I don't think Ramirez would be the guy because he's a secondhand information guy. Okay, he's a guy who would trade information. That was his job as a spook. Hal Puthoff, definitely. Hal Puthoff, I will tell you right now, would never, ever tell you the truth on that. And it's not because he's a liar or a bad guy, but he is just so deep involved in the spook world that I don't know if he knows reality from fiction anymore. And I mean that as a compliment, not an insult.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you're right. There's a guy who needs to go on there. Nicole would like to see James Lakatsky. That would be good. And if anybody says Mike Gold in our chat room from NASA, I'm gonna hope and pray that you stub your toe in the middle of the night.
Robert Bigelow. Now that's
a good name.
He's talked openly, at least somewhat, to CNN about things that he's seen. So it's time, you know, for this to get out. Of course, we always say that before the congressional hearings, and we always say it's going to be a nothing burger because it seems like this big wheel keeps spinning around and around and around. Obviously there's some people within the government that don't want this out. Some congressmen don't want this out, you know, and I think they're on the inside for this, right? So they'll say, okay, let's get these people up here. We'll give them a little bit of information, but we're not going to go ahead and say UFOs and aliens from another planet are real. That's just not going to happen. It's not going to happen from our president. It's not going to happen fully outright.
Undead Jed says Tim Taylor from Skinwalker Ranch. He's also one of the top scientists at U.S. Space Force as well.
What would it take for the American people, not only the American people, but everybody in the world? What is it going to take for them to believe it's real? Is somebody in the government coming out and admitting it, that we've got ETs coming from other planets? Well, where do you have that? We already have that. So what is it going to take? You know, people aren't going to believe it unless it happens right in front of them and they're able to touch it.
Well, one that I would like to see on there is Timothy Phillips, who was recently fired from his government position, even though he was going to be retiring in October. And this is the guy who was the assistant director of Aero under Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick. And this is a guy who came out basically saying that the Tic Tacs and other craft are ours. And the American people really don't have a clue of what we're flying. I think he needs to testify. He got fired over it for opening his mouth. Let it out. Let it out. Let's go with some other names. Paramar would like to see Richard Dolan, Preston Denick, Grant Cameron. Will Cam wants Chris Bledsoe. I'm not sure why John Bon Jovi and Demi Lovato. I don't know. Nicole would like Jay Stratton. Let's see here. Of course, Robert Bigelow, you mentioned. Brad Sorensen. Not sure who that is. Mark McClandish. No. Emery Smith. No, I wouldn't go there. Wouldn't go there. Let's see here. Oak Shannon would be good. No, Logan Paul. We don't need Logan Paul in this subject. We don't need Chris Ramsey in this subject or Jesse Michaels or anybody along that ilk. That's all Peter Thiel type people.
You've got Travis Taylor mentioned here. And the thing I believe with
Travis Taylor, that's who I was talking about, not Tim Taylor, Travis Taylor.
So the thing that I think he's stuck behind a wall and he can't talk about certain things.
That's right. And I got Tim Taylor and Travis Taylor mixed up. I always get those two mixed up.
Yeah.
Why do they have to have the same first initial and last name? I don't know.
One of them things.
Flat Six would like Colonel Carl Nell and Colonel Harlan Sanders. Colonel Sanders. Really? Yeah, because he's going to tell us what the 12 herbs and spices are.
Kit Green.
Kit Green would be good.
Yeah.
I think you have to do Eric Davis. Considering his notes are in the Wilson Davis documents that has already been entered as evidence. Why haven't you called him?
Yeah,
right?
Well.
We don't need any, and no, this isn't an offense to anybody at Skywatch or anything like that, but we don't need Jake Barber or his team. We don't. They're doing their own thing for private potential profit.
Yeah.
Michael P. Masters, Dr. Michael Masters would be a good one.
There's some people on here that I wonder, like the Demi Lovato, isn't that a singer?
Yeah, actress, singer, Disney. She had her own UFO story where she was singing to UFOs because they allegedly came around when she sang because they loved her voice. That was a bone to pick with me. You know, Stephen Greer brought her into one of his $3,500 weekends, which I'm sure she didn't pay a dime for.
Yeah.
You know, and you mix the two together. Wasn't a fan.
Yeah.
Just wasn't.
Nope.
I don't think we're ready for big time experiencers yet. I really don't. I think what we are ready for is you have to bring people with answers. You have to bring people who have the ability, Lee, to say, this is where it is. This is where it's going. But I'm going to put something out there. I know I'm going to be the bad guy when I say this. Okay. A lot of people won't like it. Maybe we'll clip this and make it a short, but I'm going to be the bad guy here. Okay. The Razor Ramon. God bless Scott Hall. Okay. I'm going to be the Scott Hall, Razor Ramon of the UFO world right now. The bad guy. Can we stop calling these people whistleblowers? Can we call them military or government experiencers or eyewitnesses instead? Now, I realize it's semantics. It's kind of like UFO versus UAP, NHI versus extraterrestrial, summoning versus psionics, because all of these newfound UApology people, they want to come up with different names because they keep using the same term. It's the stigma of everything. Well, if we're going to concentrate on stigma for a second here, there is not a single whistleblower in this bunch. A whistleblower will break their contract to get the information out. Whether that's their NDA, their top secret security, they will lead people to information. They are not getting permission from DOPSR or any other government organization to say what they can and cannot say. That is not whistleblowing. Admitting you have had an experience is not whistleblowing. That's my new pet peeve in the UFO world. And it isn't against the people who came out, because we need their stories. We need as many stories as possible. So whether it's David Grush, whether it's Jake Barber, whether it's Jason Sands or Michael Herrera or whoever it may be that has come out, thank you for coming out. We need that support, saying that there's a cover-up. This happened on military land, or this happened while I was in service, or while I was working for a contractor. Perfect. We need those leads. But they're not whistleblowers. Whistleblowers provide information that can move the ball forward, that are going to make the public go, oh my God, look at what just happened. We don't have that, Lee.
No.
We don't have that at all.
No, we don't. And who knows if we ever will get that. And if we do, it's just going to be, they're never going to admit to it. It's always going to say, well, it could be this and it could be that, no matter what you say, in the New York Times or whoever is going to release something to rebut things. That's the path we're on right now.
It would also kill a lot of those trust me, bro situations. And look, there are real people talking who cannot say a thing. Okay. Mm-hmm. I've talked to numerous people who have NDAs after their government job, and they cannot say a thing. They watch every word they say about this topic or any topic regarding their time at certain places. But we don't have a whistleblower. And like I said, the jargon, a lot of people will say, stop blowing up semantics. It means nothing. It actually does. Your thoughts on that? Am I blowing it out of proportion, Lee?
No, you're not blowing it out of proportion. In fact, you saying that, it actually it opened up my mind a little bit more on this, because you're absolutely correct. These people aren't whistleblowers because they can't say everything. They can't. They have to keep some things suppressed. They have to go, and say a lot of things in a skiff, or they got to get permission to bring out what they're going to bring out. It's almost as if it is rehearsed in so many cases, that it is rehearsed before it's even said in the Congress, during these these things that they do, where they bring everybody in to talk to them about what the heck is going on. It seems like it's all just a rehearsed thing for us, Well, just give them something, a little bit here and there.
But if we look at it, buddy, Congress is getting fed up. And even recently, like in the last few days, Anna Paulina Luna on X went off and said, it's amazing how we open up the door to these whistleblowers, but they all seem to get skiff flu and not show up. So you can tell Congress is getting fed up with it, or members of Congress are getting fed up with it. You're right. It's a game, Lee. It seems like it's a game to these people.
Yeah. How much can we, disclose without disclosing? And then, nobody's going to cop to it and say, yeah, that's what's going on. They're not. They're just going to hide in their little trench and hope everything goes away tomorrow. And if it doesn't, if things are, then they'll put out some bogus story.
Until we get somebody who is willing to break their NDA, we need, if you want to be truthful, and you may not like the name I mentioned, we need an Edward Snowden type person to come out. We need somebody who is willing to put their pension, their government jobs, their future on the line for the better sake of the country and the world about this topic. If you really want the world to take you seriously, you need a WikiLeaks type of information to come out on this. Because if that WikiLeaks information exists, not from Julian Assange, but let's say the UFO WikiLeaks exists, which most of us believe it does, that's the Pandora's box that needs to be open. Not I was driving through Area 51 and an alien came up to me, or not I was summoning UFOs at my farm in Wyoming. Not like that.
I do believe that they can't hide it forever. And the reason I say that is because, AI eventually will be the biggest truth teller there is. And we're going to hear it. They can't.
It's going to be interesting to see how it plays out, because we can continue on with these congressional hearings all we want, because it's a fun subject. It gets you popularity, gets your name in the news if you're a congressperson. But in the end, it's not providing the information. It's demoralizing. It's heartbreaking, because real people at the end of it are being affected. Those who have had the ultimate experience, and they're not allowed to have a voice. And that's why I'm passionate about this. Lee, thank you so much for coming on the Q&A, my friend. You're always so dapper looking while you're on the show, so thank you very, very much. And, of course, we say hello to Mr. Ron Bumblefoot Thal, rocking in the background with Little Brother Is Watching. Bumblefoot is the official music of Spaced Out Radio, rocking us in and out of every single show. Get your horns up for the guitar god himself. Thank you to everyone tuning us in our chat rooms tonight. YouTube, Twitch, LGAP, Facebook, Spreaker, LinkedIn, the Space Travelers Club, and on X at hashtag Spaced Out Radio. Remember, this show is copyright by Spaced Out Radio and Bigfoot Broadcasting Limited. Thank you so much for choosing to share your evening with us, because together, my friends, we own the night. Mr. Bumblefoot, we need a favor. We need you to take us home. Yes, the Woo train has docked for the night, but soon, my friends, we shall ride again. Your seats are always available. Your tickets never expire. And if you want to bring a friend, we've got room for them too. Good night, everybody. We're clear.
Good
Lord. You know what, Lee? I figured it out.
I
figured it out. You know how Tim and I do our wave thing?
Yeah.
You and I, we got the hat thing now.
Yeah. Look at this.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful.
My leg, oh my God. It cramped up so bad on me. Holy crap.
When?
Well, just before you went into the very end of the show there.
Oh, no.
Oh, good Lord. Yeah.
That's terrible.
Oh, it sucked. It's okay. But anyway. I tried to get my partner to come up with me, and he is busy that weekend, so he won't be.
Too bad, because I had a nice room in the shed for him. He could have slept on my lawnmower.
Well, you know, could have gotten a hotel room or whatever too, but
No, wait until you see how much room I got. Not that I have a big house. I just have a lot of room that isn't used.
gotcha. Well, that's a good thing, man. That's good. You know, there's this one person I want to get on the show, and it's been so hard trying to find time for her to find time to come on my show. It's been ridiculous. You ever had one of those people that's just been a nightmare to get on?
Yeah. I can name a bunch of them. I finally gave up on Gary Nolan.
Yeah, that's
Travis
weird.
Walton I gave up on.
Yeah.
What's his name? From the Liberation Times, Chris. Why can't I remember his name now? The hell is Chris's last name? Probably because it's late.
Not Bledsoe.
No.
I don't know.
The hell? Jeremy McGowan.
Uh,
Got to get a hold of him again. Christopher Sharp. That's who I'm looking for.
Christopher Sharp.
Ross Coulthart. I love Ross.
Yeah, good Lord, yes.
Yeah, but I mean, that guy's being pulled in so many different directions. He doesn't have time.
Nope.
Look at Nicole, Q-tip head Sharp. He's a nice guy. He's a nice guy.
Yeah. Well, next weekend we're going back to Baker. Do some stuff out there. There's a this cool river that runs through like several lava flows, old lava flows, and it's cut this channel, and it's got these wicked rapids in there, and it's really kind of a slot canyon that the water's cut. And there's ways to get in there and then go inside some of the old lava tubes and stuff like that. It's pretty freaking nuts, actually. And we are going to have a heck of a time looking for some Sasquatch.
Weird.
Oh, I think it's going to be great. Freaking awesome.
No, I just got a whiff of, I have my window open right now, and I just got a whiff of skunk.
Oh.
Interesting.
Tomato juice.
No, it's
if you get sprayed.
It's not the heavy skunk smell. It's the lighter skunk smell that we've been smelling up at Flight 21.
Oh, just when I said Sasquatch.
Very weird. I know there's skunks in my area.
Yeah.
But maybe I got a skunk around. Probably. Must be wondering. They're cute little things.
They're cute.
They really are.
Nasty. Yep. Some people have them as pets, which is odd, but it's all good.
Hey, don't they get them deodorized?
Yeah, they get their bags cut or whatever. Their scent glands removed. Anyway, man.
You get going.
Yeah.
No, it's not weed. British Columbia weed smells way better than just a skunk's asshole. Okay, let's personal experience. Weird.
Yeah.
Very, very weird. Uh-huh.
All right, man. I will talk to
you
later.
Major Lee. You get going.
All right. Good
We
night,
shall
everybody.
talk to you soon, buddy. Later.
Later.
Later. There goes Sweetly. T-Bone agrees with me. Spider Bite, how you doing? Well, let's see if that actually gone through. Should. No, Tim's not in the studio. Tim's not here. Why is this not working? Ah, there it is. There it is. There it is. We good. We good. We good. I'm not ready for that yet. All right. What's going on here? Oh. Oh, okay. Wonder. Hold on. I'm just going to disconnect my mic here for a second. Anti-worrying, how you doing? Welcome to SOR Chat. See if we can tighten that up like that. And that goes like that. There we go. That's better. That's better. Update on Lorelei. She's starting to feel better. That's Tim's wife. All right. Starting to feel better, which is good. Happy to hear that. Looks like Tim will be able to go into the forest with me this weekend. Fingers crossed that she doesn't have any setbacks. Little Maggie Shepherd, how are you? Did you get a hitchhiker for 21? Yes, we did a few weeks ago. Oh, anti-worrying. We already know all that stuff. No harm there. T-Bone, we're going to be, after our last video, we're going to be putting them out every 2 weeks. I realize that might not be what you want, but hear me out on this for a second, bud. Okay. Oh, that was very Canadian. Hear me out on this for a second, bud. That was very like prairie. Don't you think? That was total prairie talk right there. Holy cow. The reason why is that will actually, once it starts snowing up here, we're going to be able to have episodes through the winter if we do them every 2 weeks rather than every week. And it also gives Tim a little bit more time to get the show prepared and check it out a little bit closer for audio and video. So that way we can maybe see things that we aren't seeing by rushing to put it together. I mean, we're not trying to make a big production out of it, but it is something that, we want to make sure that, with the long winter up here where we're not, come November when the snow starts, we're probably not going to be able to get up there for at least 5 months. So if we're able to create enough episodes to last over the winter, then we're able to at least keep you guys entertained, because I know you love the story. Are you coming across juvenile Bigfoots and adults? Just the adults right now. Maybe there's babies there. I don't know. Tim does a great job. You're absolutely right. And T-Bone, he absolutely loves it too. Like, he is so pumped up about this. And we're eventually, not this weekend, but by next weekend when we're filming, we will have a gimbal with us now. So it's going to eliminate a lot of the shaking and the quick zooms and everything. So I bought a gimbal. So we'll be able to do a lot more with the filming aspect of everything now. It's going to be a lot smoother. Hey there, Hoser. Very nice. Sackage channeling her inner Canadian right there. Yeah, for sure. Oh, you love the big feats. Nicole, if you could, you would love to come up here and go to that area. I know you would. You're a Wisconsin. Hi, I'm Nicole, and I'm a Wisconsin. I cheer for the Brewers. You know, as much as I hate to admit it, the Jays are playing great baseball right now. Got to see my grandson today. He's over for the weekend. Kept on screaming like a soccer player. So I had to ask him, I said, does Grandpa need to take you to the soccer field? He's like, no. I'm like, then don't scream. Hasn't screamed since. Omar, you're still here? Did you doze off during the show? You're a Star Trek memorabilia, Joe. All right, I'm going home. Well, I actually am home. I'm going to get some rest here. I will see you all on Monday night, when my guest on Monday night will be dun 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 little Lawrence Strickler. Yes, Lawrence will be with us, and it will be fun. We shall have a grand time with Lon. Don't forget, this weekend you got Sweets, and also tomorrow afternoon, 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. Eastern, you have Dirty Filth that's going to be drawing another crazy and great cartoon. Thank you to all of our new members. Where's our new members? Thank you to Marie, Flat Six, Emperor Penguin, Amy, and that's it for tonight. Appreciate you. Thank you, Kitty Caddywhack, for the super chat. Michelle Eilis for the super chat. Amy for the super chat. And Jeff Steve Garvey, because he'll hit a home run for you, for the super chat. Greatly appreciate it. I will see you all on Monday. Yeah. I'm just going to leave just like that. Bye, everybody. See you soon.
Stay healthy, my friend.
You too.
You need bail money, give me a call.
Always, Dad. Take care.
You too.